Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3441, The Land of Ancient Flesh. The huge shadow of Snake Goddess stayed still up in the sky as its arms held the black ship. Snake Goddess and the captain of the black ship previously used their own methods to learn about the full situation, and they also watched the battle between Fuxi and the Yellow Thirk. Just now, the captain of the black ship thought that the Snake Goddess was too confident. After all, the Yellow Thirk was still quite powerful, and it wasn't easy for Fuxi to take him down. When they fought, however, it was evident that they were far too different. Fuxi was much more powerful than everyone had expected. The captain quickly grew serious, and he said, "It seems that there is a reason for your confidence in the human sovereign." "Of course," the Snake Goddess said with a glint in her cat-like eyes. "But, are you confident enough to trap me here?" At that moment, the captain looked at the shadow of Snake Goddess above his head. If Fuxi had really killed the Yellow Thirk, then the members of the Black Ship and the Divine Farmer would fall into Fuxi's hands no matter who won. The mere thought of it made the captain restless. "If you want to try, you can do it with Mahoney," the Snake Goddess calmly said as she looked towards the void on the left. The area exhibited a wave of space fluctuation, and Mahoney, who was hiding inside, appeared. "You are quite keen, Snake Goddess," she said. "Your whispers are too loud," the Snake Goddess replied. At first, Mahoney planned to attack the captain, but the captain asked his crew to fight, so things changed. She had been hiding in the dark and waiting for a good chance. She never thought that the Yellow Thirk would be disadvantaged, so she took the initiative to communicate with the captain. While all of that happened, the Snake Goddess had cleverly captured the wave of their consciousness. "I wonder who is stronger, you or the human sovereign?" the captain asked. In reality, Fuxi's power scared the captain. He hadn't seen the Snake Goddess fight for a long time. If she was as strong as Fuxi, then things would get tricky. The captain was first quite confident in himself. He thought that he was as strong as the Yellow Thirk, so when he saw that the Yellow Thirk got defeated all the time, he became not that confident. Confidence was the foundation of strength, but arrogance that grew out of confidence was a hindrance to survival. The captain had what he had today because he never underestimated any of his opponents. The Snake Goddess looked down and shook her head. "If I were the human sovereign, and the Yellow Thirk didn't have another trump card, he would have died," she commented. Upon hearing those words, Mahoney and the captain frowned. Did the Snake Goddess mean that she was stronger than Fuxi? If so, then we can only try, the captain stated. A cyan other short token appeared on the surface of Mahoney's body. It was the spearhead armor of destruction that Emperor Charm had worn. Then, a powerful force continuously gathered within her body. The Snake Goddess gently raised her head and put her hands on either side. Her large shadow followed suit and waved its hands to slap both the captain's and Mahoney's heads. Swish! The shadow of Snake Goddess was made out of pure energy and could erode almost anything. Furthermore, it was much purer than those of the people of Pear Hill because she was their leader. In turn, Mahoney flew backward to avoid the energy beams. Meanwhile, the captain of the black ship stood at the side and waited for the shadow of Snake Goddess to descend from the sky. As soon as her shadow landed on the black ship, his black cloak exploded. A bald man emerged from the black cloak. He was covered in a thin layer of scales and had two sharp horns on his forehead. The captain didn't resist but let the energy beam hit him. Crack, crack, crack. Some of the long and thin energy beams at the end of the shadow of Snake Goddess landed on the black ship. The black ship immediately shattered, while the energy eroded its wooden body and set it on fire. Then, the energy beams in the middle lashed at the captain's skin and burned him. Bright red blood gushed out of his charred black scars. The Snake Goddess found it strange that the captain didn't dodge. However, she would never hesitate in such a battle. Since he didn't avoid the attacks, she would kill him first. The fabric of her golden dress fluttered when she slightly twisted her waist. Her shadow followed her and turned around, then forced Mahoney back with ease. Afterwards, she reached out her other hand towards the captain. Her shadow also did the same thing with one hand and the tentacle-like energy beams wrapped around the captain. The erosion caused by the pure energy beams was terrible, especially since they came from the shadow of Snake Goddess. The energy beams went into the captain's body at a visible speed. Blood spurted out of his sunken body, then the energy beams quickly evaporated it. Mahoney was stunned when she saw the scene. Was the captain trying to get himself killed? Would the Snake Goddess kill him in that way? Or perhaps the Snake Goddess had used a method that made the captain unable to dodge. Multiple thoughts swam in Mahoney's head. She now wanted to escape as quickly as possible. On the other hand, the energy beams quickly eroded the captain's body into two. His whole body melted like a candle. He would surely die. Still, the Snake Goddess didn't feel relaxed at all. She didn't think that the captain was dead. Instead, she remained highly vigilant and stared straight at the other black ships not far away. The power of your shadow is truly extraordinary. The captain's voice floated over. This time, he appeared on another black ship. What? Just then, Mahoney squinted to get a closer look. Truth was, it wasn't difficult to get a physical avatar with their strength. It also wasn't hard to distinguish if the opponent was a real body or an avatar. Mahoney just saw that the shadow of Snake Goddess had eroded the captain's real body. How did he reappear? Maybe he had used some rare other shore token to bring himself back to life, but there was no reason for him to let the Snake Goddess kill him once. It seems that the rumor is true, said the Snake Goddess. She bit her lips, crossed her hands, and waved them. I heard that the captain of the black ship doesn't have a real body. These ships are your bodies. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The moment she finished speaking, countless energy beams lashed towards the black ships like whips. Most people thought that the black ship was an intimidating force, but the real strong ones were its members. The ships were just ordinary flying ships. Without the help of those at the Eternal Realm, the ordinary warriors at the Holy Soul Realm or even the Chaotic Source Realm could destroy them. But when the Snake Goddess's energy beams struck the ships, there was only a muffled sound, and the beams just bounced off the ships' surfaces. The powerful energy beams had lost their desired effect. In addition to the fact that my real bodies are the ships, I wonder what else you have found out. The captain said from the ship. The Snake Goddess thought for a while before she asked hesitantly, have you integrated with the land of ancient flesh? The land of ancient flesh was an immensely dangerous place. It was quite a small land in the far south of the Three Purities stage, but it was frightening and forbidden. After all, its exterior was a large piece of flesh. It also had a distinct feature. Any power could only work there once. The second and succeeding times, they would be ineffective. Chapter 3442, In the Black Ship. The land of ancient flesh was a whole large chunk of flesh located in the far south of the Three Purities stage. Though no one knew who explored the land of ancient flesh first, it could be assumed that it was easy to break into the place in the beginning. However, after someone dug into the land once, no pure physical force could work on it anymore. Because of this, the very first mark on the ground could still be seen to this very day. After one used fire to melt the land of ancient flesh, they found that it would only successfully melt off a small piece. Since then, the land of ancient flesh grew immune to the fire, and no longer feared any flames. All of these failed attempts led to the conclusion that methods and attempts only worked once when used on the land of ancient flesh. This large chunk of flesh seemed to have developed this rare evolutionary ability, which worked very well to its advantage. At this point, the land of ancient flesh had endured so many attacks that it was basically unstoppable. The flesh feared nothing now. Many people had attempted to break it, including the Snake Goddess and Fuxi and others. However, they failed to cause even a dent in the land of ancient flesh. Just now, the Snake Goddess used her shadow and corroded the body of the black ship's captain. The captain didn't dodge because he wanted to adapt to the energy beams from the shadow of Snake Goddess. After the captain experienced the power of the beams, the shadow of Snake Goddess became an ineffective attack to the black ships. It was in this moment that the Snake Goddess realized that this resistance possibly had something to do with the land of ancient flesh. Because of the flesh's extraordinary characteristic, many people attempted to obtain the land to use its powers. However, it was due to this evolutionary characteristic alone that no one succeeded. In theory, the land of ancient flesh could not be sliced, separated, much less be merged with anyone. If this was so, how did the captain of the black ship merge himself with such an incredible other shore token? You are quite smart to have understood it so quickly, the captain smirked. Please do aboard the ship and stay there for a while. As soon as the captain finished speaking, the black ship closest in proximity to the Snake Goddess suddenly swooped down in her direction. Just then, Snake Goddess tapped her toes in the air and flew backward rapidly, her long dress flowing gracefully in the air along with her. Normally, the snake goddess's speed should have been enough for her to escape, but the black ship suddenly produced a space fluctuation. Within a second, the snake goddess noticed the light dimmed around her, and she was already within the black ship. It was a gloomy, quiet cabin, and no matter how much the ship sped up, jolted or swayed, the people inside it were stable and unbothered. Buzz. In an attempt to leave, the snake goddess tried to use the grand teleportation and exit. However, as soon as the space channel appeared and opened up, it vanished just as quickly. It was obvious that the captain of the black ship already had used the power of space to contain her earlier. Because the ship had evolved, the power of space was unusable inside it. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Just then, the swords that hung on the wooden wall behind the snake goddess shook and vibrated. Suddenly, they shot up and pointed straight at her. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. It was as if a hidden person controlled the short swords and aimed towards the snake goddess. Though the swords were short, they had immense power within them. The snake goddess's body dodged and avoided the short swords. However, the nearby mast against the wall spun 360 degrees and fell towards her. Caught off guard, all the snake goddess could do was raise her arms to block it. With a loud bang, she was sent right into a wall. When her body collided with the wall, numerous spears hovered at the end of the passageway, ready to shoot her. It seemed that everything in the black ship was a part of the captain, and they were all more or less fatal. Initially, Mahoney stood by and watched the fight from a distance. However, when she saw that the snake goddess was devoured by the black ship, a feeling of apprehension slowly consumed her. She had originally discussed with the captain of the black ship that they were going to join forces to deal with the snake goddess. As of the moment, this didn't seem like the case. It suddenly occurred to her that she and the captain were on opposing sides. A strong sense of urgency rose within her, but just as she was about to use the grand teleportation, a black ship swooped down and engulfed her within a few seconds. Once the two warriors of the Eternal Realm were trapped, a third black ship descended towards Divine Farmer this time. Since Fuxi and Yellow Thirk were still at war against one another, the captain figured that if he trapped the Divine Farmer, he could easily take Zen away. For the captain, his plan was foolproof. This was going to be too easy. Meanwhile, Divine Farmer chased after the invisible ship with the Divine Farmer ruler gripped in his hand. At the same time, Edith concentrated on controlling the invisible ship to dodge Divine Farmer, but to no avail. Anywhere she went, Divine Farmer appeared right after. Buzz. A few moments later, both the invisible ship and Divine Farmer appeared in the north corner of the separate Amber province. Edith didn't have enough time to control the ship to dodge this time. Ghoul substitute. Shira stretched out her arms and gripped hard, as if she held onto thin, invisible threads. All of a sudden, a huge monster that was made up of corpses hovered right above the invisible ship. The ghoul had cost Shira years to piece together, so it possessed extremely strong defensive power. However, no matter how powerful a ghoul was, it would never be able to resist a single blow from Divine Farmer. Puff. Just like that, the huge ghoul was sliced in half by the ruler, and it spewed green blood left and right. As Shira saw her ghoul get killed in one strike, her eyes filled up with sadness. However, this did not mean the efforts were useless. Because the ghoul blocked the ruler, it gave Edith the window to teleport away. We can't go on like this. How about I go out and stop him? Edith, you must take everyone away, the brass man spoke out. The people of the black ship were not naturally a united group in normal times. After all, they had already been tainted as evil in the source world, and each one of them had done repulsive things in the past. However, when it came to sacrifice and saving their members, they didn't hesitate at all. After they lived on the black ship for so long, they eventually became a part of it. You can't stop him all by yourself, Shira snapped back. No, but at least I can buy you some time. Just then, the surface of the brass man's body turned yellow and solid like an iron wall. Without asking for any help, he prepared to sacrifice himself. Let's attack together. Let Edith take the red crystal to leave first, another creature spoke from not too far away. He was Vance, half human and half deer and a longtime member of the black ship. I agree, Shira nodded. Even if we fight head-on, we won't necessarily lose. If the members of the black ship teamed up, they would have enough strength to put up against a warrior at the Eternal Realm. After all, it was not long ago that the black ship trapped the Thunder Demorphodon with only 4 of them. However, the strength of warriors at the Eternal Realm also varied in amount and energy. A warrior like Divine Farmer was obviously among the more powerful ones at the Eternal Realm. No one on the black ship was willing to face such a powerful existence unless it was an utmost necessity. Left with absolutely no choice, they decided to fight Divine Farmer head-on and as a team. All of a sudden, the invisible ship moved through spatial transference again. As usual, Divine Farmer appeared behind it like a taunting shadow. Once he slashed down with the ruler, the brass man was already out of the invisible ship. A light emerged from the brass man's body, and just like that, the aura of another shore token surged out from him. At the same time, a huge brass pillar appeared in his right hand as he charged towards the sky. Crack! With one attempt, the strike of Divine Farmer's ruler hit the brass pillar precisely. The brass pillar cracked right at the middle, and as if it was made out of soft mud, the crack trickled down all the way to the bottom of the pillar. The combat dragon pillar, which was the brass man's prized weapon, was destroyed in an instant. Chapter 3443, Combat Dragon Absorbed. After Divine Farmer had destroyed the combat dragon pillar with the ruler, he slashed at the brass man once more. Just as his second strike was about to land on the brass man, a bandage suddenly wrapped around his arm. At the other end of the bandage was the bamboo coal. The bamboo coal glowed with colorful light after the bandage unwrapped. In the black ship, the bamboo coal was the most proficient in using poison. Back then, when the first Usman appeared, he also relied on his fast-spreading, flash insect poison to make thousands of the provinces in the source world turn red. Whoosh! The bamboo coal then pulled the bandage and passed by the brass man and rushed towards Divine Farmer. His whole body shone brightly and had turned into a semi-liquid state. Under his skin was not flesh, but water. Whoosh! Meanwhile, the ruler slashed down and sank into the body of the bamboo coal. In turn, the bamboo coal immediately softened and turned into a mass of sticky venom that spread out on Divine Farmer's arms. Sizzle! As soon as the venom came into contact with Divine Farmer, his arms became pitch black. The black spread at an alarming speed, and in no time, it reached his forearms. You used poison on me. How naive of you! The Divine Farmer ruler he held emitted a green light that rolled towards him. The light mildly surrounded his arms and turned them back to normal. Then, the remaining green light followed the spreading venom. In reality, the venom was the real body of the bamboo coal. It was his trump card. It liquefied his form and turned it into a toxic liquid that he used to attack. Although the bamboo coal hadn't reached the eternal realm, he was a much experienced warrior in the black ship. He was ranked third on the black ship in terms of age. He had liquefied himself into poison 3 times in the past. It took him a long time to recover every time he was liquefied, and the recovery process was painful. However, he was always successful in killing opponents who were very difficult to deal with, including a warrior at the Eternal Realm. This time, however, his opponent was Divine Farmer. Furthermore, the ball of green light Divine Farmer used was fatal to him. He immediately felt chills when he saw the green light. He wanted to escape, but it was too late. The green light had already entangled with the venom, then the venom neutralized and disappeared. Bane! Dang it! When the real body of the bamboo coal got destroyed, 2 more warriors charged towards Divine Farmer from both sides. The person on the left carried a huge saber, and his name was Alonzo, and the person on the right was Shira. The 2 of them had a good relationship with the bamboo coal, whose name was Bane. There was no way they weren't going to do anything when the green light from the Divine Farmer ruler melted him. Buzz! At that moment, a strange dark mark appeared on the surface of the great saber on Alonzo's back. Then, he lifted the saber and swung it at Divine Farmer's head. The black saber radiance cut towards Divine Farmer with an irresistible and overpowering force. Aside from the captain, the strongest one among the 13 members of the black ship was probably Alonzo. Unfortunately, the Eternal Realm was far too stronger than the Holy Soul Realm, especially when the warrior of the Eternal Realm was Divine Farmer, who had a powerful lifeblood weapon. Alonzo's strike, which seemed to be able to chop the heaven and earth, only made a muffled sound when it touched the Divine Farmer ruler. The black saber radiance disappeared. The strange mark on the great saber disintegrated, and so did the whole saber itself. Phew! After Divine Farmer blocked the attack, he slapped Alonzo with his ruler. Bang! The strike landed squarely on Alonzo's head. Although he had chaotic source spirits to protect him, even a single strike from a warrior like Divine Farmer contained over 100,000 divine megatons of force. Thus, Alonzo's chaotic source spirits quickly became exhausted, and at the same time, his head turned into a mass of blood. Then, he turned into a headless corpse and fell. Alonzo! Shira's eyes turned dark red as she stretched out her hand and tried to grab Divine Farmer's head. On the other hand, Divine Farmer didn't even look at her. Instead, he raised his ruler. However, Shira had grabbed the Divine Farmer ruler. Divine Farmer didn't expect that the woman who reeked of corpses could resist his strike. In turn, he immediately tried to pull the ruler out of her hand. Even then, Shira's white jade-like hand still tightly held onto the ruler like a pincer. Divine Farmer was utterly shocked. "How could your hand have such power?" he asked in disbelief. Ordinary people didn't smell Shira's stench. Or, maybe she didn't stink like that at first, but because she was always around the dead, she eventually smelled like them. She was a mere cultivator at the Holy Soul Realm who strengthened her body to the point that she could fight a warrior in the Eternal Realm. It was indeed something that surprised Divine Farmer. Just as Shira had bought more time, 3 more members of the Black Ship came over. Of course, they wouldn't let such a fleeting opportunity pass by. Then again, they were far too different when it came to strength. Moreover, the remaining members became chaotic and couldn't cooperate well anymore due to the deaths of Bane and Alonzo. While that happened, Divine Farmer tapped Shira's head with his other hand to force her to retreat. As Shira retreated, Divine Farmer had already pulled out the ruler, and the ruler whirled around his back. Puff, puff, puff. One of the 3 members of the Black Ship was cut into 2 at the waist, and the other 2 lost their arms. Although they wouldn't die, they couldn't fight in a short time. Whoosh! When Divine Farmer had taken down several members of the Black Ship in a row, he flew towards the invisible ship. Inside the invisible ship was Edith, who was visibly anxious. No matter where she went, the Divine Farmer followed closely behind. What made it worse was that the other members of the Black Ship couldn't defeat him. When panic was about to overtake her, the brass man appeared in the invisible ship again. "What are you doing?" she asked. She didn't know why the brass man returned. The brass man did not answer and only stared fiercely at Zen's red crystal. Then, he stretched both of his hands and put it on his shoulder. "Combat Dragon Absorb," he roared, then his hands released a faint mist and fused him with the red crystal. It turned out that the Combat Dragon pillar that Divine Farmer had just broken was not another shore token, but a weapon that the captain of the Black Ship had made for him. The brass man's other shore token could combine his weapon and his body into one. He had always used the Combat Dragon pillar to fight, and now Divine Farmer had destroyed it. Of course, it was hard to find a suitable weapon in a short time. Suddenly, he thought of the red crystal. So he placed it on his shoulder and merged it with his body. Right after that, he left the invisible ship and rushed towards Divine Farmer. Now, the reason Divine Farmer had chased the invisible ship for so long was because of Zen. The second he saw the brass man rush towards him, his face became unreadable. The red crystal was undoubtedly a good material to use, but wouldn't that be giving him what he wanted by using Zen as a weapon and coming to him? Therefore, he didn't dodge and instead charged forward as well. Once again, he used the Divine Farmer ruler to slash through the air and swung it at the red crystal. Bang! Crack! The first strike failed to shatter the red crystal, but the second strike finally broke it. Combat Dragon Absorb! White mist burst out from the brass man's hands. Since the red crystal was damaged, he could no longer use it as a weapon. Thus, he made up his mind. He took Zen's body inside the red crystal and merged with it. Chapter 3444, A Good Weapon. There was no way the brass man could think of anything else during this critical moment. He knew that Zen was the crux of all these matters and was the reason for Divine Farmer's chase. They wanted Zen for a specific purpose, and until this purpose was fulfilled, there was no way they would harm him. It was fortunate that the brass man's conjecture turned out to be true. Divine Farmer's frown was very obvious when he decided to use Zen as a weapon. Divine Farmer, Yellow Thirk, and Mahoney all received the same order from the element spirit race: take advantage of Zen's inability to leave the other shore and capture him. Seeing the brass man carry Zen on his shoulders as he rushed towards him, Divine Farmer had no choice but to tilt his Divine Farmer ruler to hit the brass man's head and avoid harming Zen. Given his rich experience in combat, the brass man easily saw through his opponent's move. He ducked and swung Zen's body forward to use him as a shield. Determined to protect himself, the brass man raised Zen's body and smashed it towards the Divine Farmer. In fear of hurting Zen, Divine Farmer chose to withdraw his ruler. In his haste, he did not have enough time to dodge the swipe heading towards him and could only take the force of the attack head-on. Bang! Zen's head directly slammed onto Divine Farmer's chest with a loud thud. The impact was so strong and penetrated deep into Divine Farmer's chest, through his heart, and onto his spine. This strong, penetrating force was the result of the brass man's Thurgy, the combat dragon power. It did not just stop with the Divine Farmer's body, in fact, the same power erupted on several thousand feet of ground behind him. The amount of destruction caused by this Thurgy was terrifying and could very well play a decisive effect in normal combat. Divine Farmer's body trembled and the sharp pain he felt in his chest confirmed his injuries. A murderous glint flashed through his eyes, furious that this brass man managed to deal such heavy damage to him. Divine Farmer quickly made a dash and came upon his opponent's back. He raised his Divine Farmer ruler and brought it down. Clatter! The surface of his weapon glowed an ominous dark green as numerous black carvings flowed through it. Divine Farmer was good at detoxification, but he was also considered an expert at weaponizing poison. This willow green poison, for example, was a unique concoction Divine Farmer himself created. It was so potent that not even an Eternal Realm Master could hope to survive it. He did not normally use this on Holy Soul Realm opponents, but the rage he felt from being hoodwinked by the brass man was enough to make him pull out all his cards. Unfortunately for him, the brass man was also set to go all out in this fight. Although Divine Farmer's agility was on par with his, all the brass man really needed to do was be fast enough to wield Zen as his shield. As the poisonous ruler headed towards him, the brass man quickly brandished Zen as his primary defense. He didn't even need to turn around. This counterattack was so sudden that Divine Farmer couldn't react in time. He watched in horror as his Divine Farmer ruler chopped down towards Zen's body and he was unable to stop it. Bang! There was a loud, clanging sound as the weapon hit Zen's leg. Instead of going through the flesh, it was as if another weapon collided with the ruler. The sound and sight shocked not only Divine Farmer and the brass man but the rest of the Black Ship's members. There was no way the brass man expected Divine Farmer to hit Zen so carelessly. Meanwhile, Divine Farmer was at his wit's end in fear of Zen dying from his poison. However, what astonished everyone was that Zen remained unharmed through this entire ordeal. The attack dealt by Divine Farmer had at least 100,000 divine megatons of force. How in the world was Zen able to resist such a blow? Could it be that his chaotic source spirits managed to absorb the attack and saved his life? Were his chaotic source spirits truly so strong that they were able to resist 100,000 divine megatons of force? The exchange of blows boosted the brass man's confidence. It was basically a confirmation that he could choose to wield Zen as an invincible weapon, so he carried the man towards Divine Farmer. Brothers of the Black Ship, lend me a hand. Ready to answer his call, a member of the Black Ship stretched out his hand and patted the top of his skull where another shore token emerged. It was a black and withered branch. Withering power. This was similar to the latent Thurgy Zen once used to resist Elizabeth in the past. Another member of the Black Ship patted his chest and a small circular lens appeared. He quickly chucked it towards the brass man. Power transfer lens. Buzz. These two other shore tokens worked well together. The withering power released by the black withered branch, that could increase one's strength sixfold, was reflected by the lens. The brass man could easily feel its effects rush through him. Since the brass man was a power-type warrior, his full strength could very well reach over 50,000 divine megatons. Such formidable strength truly stood out among all Holy Soul Realm warriors and could easily reach the threshold of the Eternal Realm. However, with the use of withering power, his strength soared to 300,000 divine megatons. So long as these two other members of the Black Ship continued to assist him, then the brass man could continuously unleash such frightening amounts of power. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A white mist began to emanate from the brass man's hand that held Zen's body. He felt really good considering the significant increase in his strength. Though cooperation wasn't a strange concept to the Black Ship, this was the first time they used such a strategy against such a powerful being like Divine Farmer. Go to perdition, whoosh. Even Divine Farmer faltered in the face of this ferocious attack. He fully intended to avoid this all-powerful force headed his way, but he was also worried and wondered if Zen would be able to withstand the brass man's super strength. Before Divine Farmer could come up with a decision, another Black Ship member decided to intervene. It was Edith, the controller of the invisible ship. Invisible ship, she commanded. The invisible ship itself was another shore token. Although it was virtually useless in combat, it had other functions that could be put to good use. Space imprisonment. In times of need, the invisible ship could be used as an escape method or a way to trap enemies. With Edith's command, the invisible ship instantly disassembled into countless, transparent space fragments that recombined into a space cage intended to trap Divine Farmer. Given Divine Farmer's strength, it wouldn't be that difficult for him to break out of this space cage if he had the time, around 12 seconds to be exact. However, when Edith trapped him inside, she also let the brass man in. Divine Farmer was essentially cornered. There was nowhere left he could run to escape the brass man's attack. A wicked grin flashed through his opponent's face. "Divine Farmer, let's see if you can withstand this," he shouted. The brass man could feel the blood within his body boil as his mist-covered hands raised Zen's body and smashed it against Divine Farmer's head. Left with no other choice, Divine Farmer slid his fingers across the Divine Farmer ruler. Buzz! Green light flashed from the ruler and spread all throughout his body, like a blossoming willow. Just as the light began to shine, Zen's head made contact with Divine Farmer's body. Pop! Despite the harsh blow, Divine Farmer was unharmed. However, his once indestructible Divine Farmer ruler twisted so suddenly. Pop! Determined to not give Divine Farmer any chance to recover, the brass man quickly smashed Zen down on him. This second attack twisted the Divine Farmer ruler even more and completely distorted its shape. Pop! Upon the third smash, Divine Farmer fell back and smashed the space cage Edith trapped him in. His weapon was now greatly distorted, but at least he managed to withstand 3 incredibly fatal attacks. Of course, the state of his Divine Farmer ruler made his heart ache. It would take a long time to nurture his lifeblood weapon back into shape. Still, Zen's unharmed state concerned him more. How in the world was the young man completely intact after enduring intense bouts of power? A look of regret flashed through the brass man's face when he realized that he had failed to subdue Divine Farmer. Just a few more smashes and he was certain to have ended him. It would take the brass man a few seconds to realize that the astonishment on Divine Farmer's face wasn't directed at him, but to Zen, whom he wielded as a weapon. Well, I got to admit this boy's physical body makes for a good weapon, the brass man thought to himself. Then he remembered that Zen withstood nearly 300,000 divine megatons of force but was barely injured. It wasn't long before the brass man's face was the exact mirror of astonishment on Divine Farmer's. Chapter 3445, The Growing Light Column. In the far northwest of the Source World, there was a unique copper tree. The roots of the tree reached deep into the ground. After growing for a long time, it was now able to extract a very special type of copper ore from the deep underground and absorb the ore into its core. This copper was very flexible, and its raw form, which was viscous liquid, gave it the name, water copper. The water copper could be cut with a knife easily. But once a huge force came into contact with it, it would automatically become solid and extremely hard in an instant. All in all, instead of a type of ore, it could also be described as a kind of liquid with magical properties. Based on these properties, the captain of the black ship finally built the combat dragon pillar for the brass man. The brass man had wanted to test the effect of the combat dragon pillar before, so he used the power transfer lens and the withering power to exert a force of nearly 300,000 divine megatons on the pillar. The result was satisfying for him. The pillar could take on the force easily. Therefore, the stronger the force the combat dragon pillar received, the stronger it had become. Had the brass man possessed 300,000 divine megatons of force before, Divine Farmer wouldn't have been able to cut the combat dragon pillar. But at that time, the brass man had only relied on his own strength when he used the combat dragon absorb, so the combat dragon pillar was naturally destroyed by Divine Farmer with a casual strike of his ruler. Now, however, the brass man's weapon wasn't the combat dragon pillar, his weapon now was a human's body. Although Zen was basically an eternal realm warrior, a force of 300,000 divine megatons wasn't a laughing matter. Even a warrior like Zen would still have his body crushed if his body was struck by such a force. Everything the brass man did just now was done on the spur of the moment and without any further consideration at all. Now that he calmed down, he realized that what happened didn't at all make any sense. On Zen's 3 purities stone in the Grand Plane stage, Zen's anchor bodies changed. The force exerted on Zen's real physical body had been transmitted to his anchor bodies. One's anchor body was connected to the eternal scroll painting, and the eternal scroll painting was connected to the eternal divine courtyard. When the force was transmitted to Zen's anchor bodies, an imperceptible wave of energy was also transmitted to the sacred cup in the eternal divine courtyard at an unimaginable speed. Zen's body shook. Consequently, even the entire sacred cup shook. After the tiny ripples on the surface of the thick blood in the cup died out, the map in the circle of light on the ground began to change. There were originally 2 light columns rising in the map. Each of them respectively represented the bloodline of Chiyu and the bloodline of the Chaos Ancient God. These 2 light columns both had a life attribute, so they were in the lower left area. However, after Zen took on the 300,000 divine megatons of force, another light column grew several inches tall in the fan-shaped area on the lower right side, the area which represented destruction. Complicated expressions appeared on the faces of the 4 bronze statues on the square. It was already hard to believe that this guy was able to perform the blood merge reconstruction. Now, he also wasn't playing by the rules. Generally, even if a qualified person succeeded in obtaining the recognition of the ancestry-level bloodline, the shape of the map would be set in the shortest amount of time and wouldn't change again. Zen had been lying motionless in the sacred cup for a long time, so why did the light column in the map grow again? This looked like he was cheating. However, as long as there was a light column connected to the edge of the circle of light, it meant that he was acknowledged by the ancestry-level bloodline and also obtained the ancestry-level bloodline. There were 373 light columns in total. How great the potential of the ancestry-level bloodline one merged with was would depend on how much potential the warriors in the sacred cup had and how many light columns they connected. Something seems wrong with the ancestry-level bloodline, don't you think? If this light column can also reach the circle of light, then this kid will have 3 light columns connected to the circle of light. The best record in the eternal divine courtyard is 14 light columns. It happened a very long time ago, and unlike what he's doing now. The warrior, who made that record, made the 14 light columns grow in one go. The 4 bronze statues were all staring at Zen. A faint trace of excitement was apparent in their eyes. Their sense of duty made them wish that everything would go as usual, so when Zen first appeared, they were quite hostile to him. At this moment, however, their thoughts had somewhat changed. The eternal divine courtyard had been abandoned for a long time. Sealed by the time lock, what was left of the nearly eternal time might remain this way forever, and that would mean endless boring years for them. Although no one said it out loud, deep in their hearts, they all hoped that something would break this stagnant eternal state. And now, this strange thing appeared. Divine Farmer stared pensively at Zen, who was carried on the brass man's shoulder. Even though he couldn't figure out what was going on, he now fully understood why the element spirit race wanted to win Zen over. But he'd gone this far, so he didn't intend to give up. With a slight wave of his right hand, the already twisted Divine Farmer ruler was hidden inside his body. Swoosh! A terrifying bloodline power was released from Divine Farmer's body. A split second later, a green, horned, bull-headed shadow appeared behind him. The shadow let out a strange cry and disappeared in an instant. The moment it disappeared, it started materializing within Divine Farmer's body. In addition to using their own bloodline to condense a lifeblood weapon, Eternal Realm warriors also had their own bloodline thurgies. For example, the Golden Sword of Eastern Emperor Tai and the 9 Sun World Destruction of Emperor Charm were both their bloodline the Rugis. Divine Farmer named his bloodline, Weird Blood. As one of the root-level bloodlines, the Weird Blood was extremely powerful, not at all inferior to the bloodline belonged to Yellow Thirk, Eastern Emperor Tai, Emperor Charm, or other Eternal Realm warriors. However, very few people in the Source World had seen the bloodline Thurgy of Divine Farmer because he very rarely used it. The Weird Blood could transform him into 3 different mutants, which were all indestructible. During the transformation process, however, Divine Farmer's consciousness would be hazy. Moreover, the more he used his blood Thurgy, the longer he would stay in his mutant form. He was worried that one day, he might lose the ability to transform back to his original form and become a strange monster without wisdom, so he was very careful in using this bloodline Thurgy of his. In fact, he didn't want to use his bloodline Thurgy in handling the members of the Black Ship. Nevertheless, upon seeing the strange characteristics of Zen's body, he felt the urgency to activate his blood Thurgy. His body began to lengthen, and 2 horns grew on his head. His feet also turned into a pair of strong hooves. It was a mutant in the form of a goat monster. Divine Farmer's consciousness was gradually fading. The goat monster was the most ferocious of his 3 mutant forms, but it was also the form that Divine Farmer hated the least. The only thing that Divine Farmer could do to control this goat monster was to plant a purpose in his mind: he must take Zen back. A second later, the consciousness in the goat monster's eyes completely disappeared. After a moment of haziness, it let out a strange howl. The brass man standing not far away had been observing for a long time. Seeing that the goat monster was still a little confused, he immediately carried Zen and smashed at the monster with Zen's body. Boom! The strike still contained a force of 300,000 divine megatons. While the goat monster was still howling, it was directly thrown down from the air, creating a huge crater in the ground. However, the almost indestructible goat monster suffered no injury at all. It turned over, ran a few steps on the ground with both hands and feet, and pounced on the brass man. Boom! With Zen on his shoulder, the brass man once again smashed Zen towards the ground. He didn't believe that the mutant transformed from Divine Farmer wouldn't really be killed. However, what the brass man didn't know was that every time he carried Zen and smashed him, the third light column in the area symbolizing destruction under the sacred cup in the eternal divine courtyard would grow taller. Chapter 3446, The Creation Quadrant. The light pillar in the destruction quadrant continued to rise. Soon, it touched the ring of light at the very edge of the map. The 4 bronze statues all looked upon the cup. Now that there were 3 light pillars, Zen was supposedly ready to wake up. He obtained the ancestry-level bloodline so easily. Yet he remained lying motionless in the sacred cup. The bronze statues had no clue that Zen was also confused. As he lay in the darkness, he was positive that he was awake and not in a dream. But he couldn't feel himself at all. At the very least, his sense of touch and smell had already left. He couldn't even perceive if he had a corporeal body. It seemed as though he was floating in the darkness as a mere lonely soul. Fortunately, the soul's eyes and ears remained intact. Zen could see dots of light in the distance, as well as hear some sounds from his surroundings. Murmurs rang in his ears every now and then. Each time a sound came through, the dots of light would spread out like dancing flies. It seemed like there was someone chanting incantations. And the light dots were following the commands of said incantations. Why was such a thing in his mind, Zen wondered. How long would the state last? He received no answer. Meanwhile, in the source world, something explosive resounded. A pit that could hold a great lake suddenly appeared. The brass man smashed into the ground. At the bottom of the pit, as soon as the goat monster's body was exposed, it was thrown into the air and smacked back down by the brass man. Boom! Another great pit appeared as the goat monster was once again smashed into the ground. Behind them, there were already over 20 lake-sized huge pits. While the brass man's series of attacks caused no substantial damage to the goat monster, the latter was at least sufficiently suppressed enough so it had no strength to fight back. But with each strike, the brass man released 300,000 divine megatons of force, enough that the other 2 black ship members could hardly bear it any longer. The withering power and the power transfer lens were both other shore tokens from stage 33 of the other shore, but they consumed divine crystals rapidly. At such a consumption rate, it was impractical to crumb divine crystals one after another to replenish the other shore tokens. A single replenishment of such a level cost millions of divine crystals. Even if the powerful warriors of the Holy Soul Realm were extremely agile, they couldn't possibly crush all the crystals one by one. Before entering a battle, they usually prepared a space ring where they collected the many crushed divine crystals. This way, they could replenish their other shore token with divine crystal energy during the battle. But the brass man had used the force far too extravagantly. Once the black ship members replenished divine crystal energy 3 consecutive times, the spare space ring was already empty. Shira, Edith. The black ship members shifted their eyes to the 2, pointing to them at the same time. Both Shira and Edith immediately understood what they meant and instantly moved to the front of the 2, giving them their spare space rings. And so there was a break during the transfer. The brass man was pouring his force into the goat monster's body through Zen, but there was now a sudden break in the force's steady stream. As a result, the brass man attacked with only a few thousand divine megatons of force. Bang! The goat monster struck a pose, ready to be thrown out again. Suddenly, it found the impact on it far too gentle and weak. It glared at the brass man in surprise. When the man looked back at it, his eyes were filled with the same expression. Realizing that the brass man lost his strength, its 2 horns began flashing green light before immediately lowering its head to push the man up with just its horns. Each time the divine farmer turned into a goat monster, it would kill many people. With its ferocious personality, it refused to stop until it killed the brass man. Seeing the horns rushing toward him, the brass man was so anxious that he lifted Zen up, using him as a shield to cover him. The divine farmer ordered the goat monster to take Zen back before his consciousness disappeared. But the goat monster didn't seem to care one bit about what the divine farmer was thinking whatsoever. Instead, it rushed right at Zen's head. Crack! The collision's great impact sent both Zen and the brass man into the air. Because of the combat dragon absorb, the brass man was still firmly gripping Zen when the latter once again displayed something miraculous. He was left completely unharmed from the goat monster's attack. Woo! After having taken quite many beatings from the brass man, the goat monster didn't care to show any mercy toward him now that it finally had its chance for revenge. As its pair of strong and powerful rear legs made a leap, its sharp horns with green light pierced toward the brass man once again. In terms of real strength, even powerful existences such as Fuxi and Yellow Thirk couldn't defeat the goat monster too easily, let alone the brass man who was only at the Holy Soul Realm. Knowing that he couldn't defeat the goat monster, the brass man had no choice but to place his hopes on Zen, tightly placing him in front to serve as a shield. Crack, 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 the goat monster then turned into a white shadow before attacking the brass man over and over. The brass man was like a matador, defending himself carefully with Zen, sweat dripping down his face. He couldn't help but rejoice when he saw how the goat monster was not all that intelligent. Because of the goat monster's repeated attacks, another light pillar extended from the quadrant that represented creation, at the bottom of the sacred cup. It was exactly the same as the one in the destruction quadrant, rising upward. The 4 bronze statues believed Zen would stop. But they were left dumbfounded again in the face of the new light pillar. There was one in the destruction quadrant just now, but another one is popping out of the creation quadrant. This light pillar can also reach consummation. This is the 4th one, and the 4 light pillars exist in 3 different quadrants. All of them were speechless as they gazed at the extending light pillar. The root-level bloodline that the divine farmer inherited was initially born from the creation quadrant. The very fact that he had turned himself into a goat monster was a form of creation. From its appearance, strength could be displayed in thousands of billions of forms, but in the map of the ancestry-level bloodline, strength would be simply divided into 4 great quadrants: destruction, creation, life, and space-time. Only small differences existed among the 373 light pillars that focused on various areas. The goat monster's attacks directly helped Zen consummate a light pillar. Once it launched over 10 attacks in a single shot, the 2 black ship members finally replenished enough divine crystal energy. When the power transfer lens once again faced the brass man, his force surged once again. Just as the brass man was ready to go against the monster again, a great black shadow suddenly shrouded them from above their heads, swallowing the goat monster with a bang. It was a black ship that formed the great black shadow that descended, the captain's real body. Boom, 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 a series of roars emerged from within the ship, but it wasn't broken. It was clear that the goat monster struggled to escape. Captain, the brass man only felt he had endless power to release. You can't kill it. It's an immortal body. Since you've obtained Zen, don't waste any time. Let's leave as soon as possible, the captain said when he reappeared on the deck like a ghost. Chapter 3447, Unable to leave. This was the captain's style of doing things. He always completed tasks at minimum cost. The other members of the black ship never doubted him. Even if the divine farmer killed a few of them, no one even thought of killing the divine farmer in revenge. The black ship always took revenge, but they needed better timing. They believed that their captain would take care of it. But what about Usman? Shira asked, her hair fluttering in the wind. The mission would be completed when they were able to take Zen away with them. But she hadn't forgotten the captain's another goal. If possible, he would summon the evil god to swallow Usman. This way, the evil god would become stronger and gain some authority in the source world. This is not the right time. We'll find another chance, said the captain. Shira nodded wordlessly and entered Edith's invisible ship along with the other members of the black ship. In a flash, the invisible ship had reached the sky. The captain's 3 black ships had trapped Mahoney, the divine farmer, and the snake goddess. Each black ship was a part of the captain's body, but they were parts that he could abandon. The remaining black ships flew into the distance alongside the invisible ship. Boom, 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 the snake goddess flew among the houses in one of the black ships. The door of the cabin before her suddenly slammed shut and bumped violently into her. A red light flashed at her fingertips, turning into a sharp claw light before she unleashed it at the door. Crack, the door instantly cracked into pieces. Blood flowed from the cracks of the door. The black ship was made of flesh. I don't think you have completely inherited the ability of the land of ancient flesh, said the snake goddess. The power she had used was still bloodline power. Her lethality had greatly increased after she had fused her shadow into her real body. She used the power of her shadow to open the door of the black ship. If the captain really had occupied the land of ancient flesh, he would be invincible, and the shadow of snake goddess wouldn't be able to cause any damage to the black ship. You are intelligent and your judgment is accurate, but I've already got Zen. So it's goodbye. The captain's voice echoed around the cabin. A capstan in the black ship suddenly boomed. A huge square of wood smashed through several rooms and towards the snake goddess. It seemed to be the captain's heavy punch. The snake goddess stretched out a hand and blocked the wood. She pinched it with her slender fingers, instantly turning it into dust. Do you really think you can leave? She said calmly, dusting her hands. Why can't we? The captain asked, tendrils of frustration lacing through his voice. Fuxi and the yellow Thirk were engaged in a fierce battle, the others barely posing any threat. The captain was relaxed because he thought that no one could stop him. The snake goddess merely waved her arms around, causing her shadow to form innumerable energy beams that extended to different rooms. The energy beams were like densely packed ropes, and bound up the pillars and walls of the black ship. The snake goddess's body then began to spin. Under the force of the energy beams, the black ship began to creak. It was beginning to crumble from within. The power of the snake goddess grew to a point where the black ship shattered into pieces. The fragments of the ship rained down, along with the blood its structure contained. The snake goddess stretched out a hand, causing an energy beam to sweep towards the falling fragments of the black ship and grabbed one of the planks. The plank was colored slightly differently from the others. Its surface was golden, and it filled people with warmth as they held it. "Why can't you leave? You'll know soon," the snake goddess said to the golden plank. She then pinched the plank gently, crushing it and causing blood to spurt out of it. Once the plank broke, the falling fragments of the black ship burst into flames. If the snake goddess hadn't crushed the golden plank, the broken black ship would have recovered its original form in minutes. The black ship's power and ability to maintain its own shape came from the golden plank, which was a part of the captain's body. Meanwhile, the other black ships and the invisible ship were rapidly shuttling through the space channel. At the speed they were moving, they could cross several big provinces in a short time. The source world was quite large. They'd be safe as long as they avoided the first round of tracking. It would not be easy to find the black ship. "We've passed through 3 provinces. Are we safe now?" Edith asked. Edith was nervous and had become more so when the captain had suddenly asked her to take everyone with her. "As we have left the separate Amber province, they will never be able to find us." "Edith, you've done a good job this time," said Shira, smiling. "Thank you." Edith stared ahead, concentrating on controlling the invisible ship. They were about to pass through a large province. She had to prepare the appropriate Sanskrit word to pass through the boundary wall. They had just passed through the boundary wall when Edith's face froze. She looked at the scene before her in a daze and said, "Shira. Captain, you need to look at this." Every member of the black ship turned to look, their expressions changing as one. They were now in the separate Amber province. Why had they come back? "That's impossible. We have been heading west. This is impossible. We can't return to the separate Amber province." The members of the black ship didn't know what was happening. The captain in his black cloak thought hard. It was a moment before he said, "Someone has tampered with space. Even the invisible ship has gotten lost. We are trapped in here." The snake goddess had warned him, and now, they were encountering this. He knew exactly what was going on. How can someone do this to the space across so many provinces? "I mean, who can do that?" the brass man asked. He was still carrying Zen on his shoulder, unwilling to put down such a handy weapon. "Ordinary warriors at the Eternal Realm may find it difficult to do," the captain said, his eyes serious. "But what if it is Othniel who has mastered the truth level Thurgy?" Othniel was the Chaos Ancient God standing behind the Bearing race. If the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race wanted to ensure that everything was all right, they might ask Othniel to help them. The Finale Way and the Purge Way both had Chaos Ancient Gods to support them, because there would always be a place for them to live no matter which way was completed. This was exactly the black ship's disadvantage. Their ultimate goal was to completely destroy the chaos and cause the Chaos Ancient Gods who had mastered the truth level Thurgies to disappear. This was why no Chaos Ancient God was willing to be their ally. Chapter 3448, Gap of Strength. It was because of the Chaos Ancient Gods that the black ship had spent their days sailing endlessly, never settling down in the source world. The Chaos Ancient Gods didn't like the black ship, so they couldn't establish a stronghold in the source world. The 6 Chaos Ancient Gods had secretly been working behind the scenes. "How powerful will Othniel's control over the space be?" Edith asked, eyes wide with astonishment. She had once been told by the captain of the black ship that she was probably the most talented person in the source world in terms of manipulating space. However, even she paled in comparison to the Chaos Ancient God, who had mastered the space truth. "I'm afraid we're about to find out," the captain said gravely. Under normal circumstances, the black ship never cowered away from battling other super forces. However, when faced with the Chaos Ancient Gods themselves, even the black ship knew this would be quite the challenge. They had been lucky enough to avoid the Chaos Ancient Gods in the past, but this time, it seemed there was no way out of this. "Should we summon him?" Shira suddenly asked. "Of course," said the captain, squinting. Apparently, he had been well prepared. Boom! A huge hole ripped through the bottom of a black ship, from which Mahoney emerged. Rage flashed in her eyes as she scanned her surroundings, searching for her prey. She had wanted to join hands with the captain of the black ship to fight against the snake goddess, yet he double-crossed her and imprisoned her on a black ship. While it had taken her a great deal of effort to get out, all she wanted to do now was seek revenge. Mahoney activated her spiritual sense, and soon she found another black ship nearby. Tearing through space once more, she teleported to the next black ship in a single breath. "Captain," she smiled, "don't blame me for what happens next." Swoosh! A formidable energy wave emanated from Mahoney's body. Immense divine megatons of force formed a ring around her as she threw a punch towards the black ship. Just as her fist connected with the hull of the ship, she heard a loud thud coming from within it. Boom! Apparently, this black ship also contained a prisoner, the goat monster that the divine farmer had transformed into. Even if it had more power than the snake goddess, it couldn't match her intelligence. It hadn't been able to escape the black ship till then. Now, as Mahoney and the goat monster smashed the hull from both inside and outside at the same time, the black ship broke into pieces under their joint efforts. Crash! As the black ship collapsed before her, Mahoney drew her fist back to throw another punch, thinking the person on the ship was its captain. To her astonishment, it turned out to be a goat monster. The goat monster was in a state of rage when it emerged from its prison. Seeing someone about to attack it, it didn't hesitate to strike back. Divine Farmer's original consciousness was buried deep, the goat monster practically had a mind of its own. Unfortunately for Mahoney, it couldn't see that she was actually an ally. Boom! Though exceptionally good at melee combat, Mahoney was at a distinct disadvantage when faced with this invincible goat monster. Before she could even throw her punch, the goat monster rammed right into her. Countless cracks appeared on her armor. Mahoney was stunned for a moment before she recognized her opponent. It was the goat monster that Divine Farmer transformed into using his bloodline power. "Wait," she cried as the goat monster smashed its sturdy hoof on Mahoney's chest, knocking the breath out of her. Crack! The armor on her chest shattered instantly, and the impact caused her to fall to the ground like a meteor. "Divine Farmer, stop it!" Mahoney pleaded weakly, but the goat monster wouldn't listen to reason. Without giving her time to breathe, it thrust at her with its sharp horns. Mahoney felt immense fear. How miserable it would be to be killed by an ally. As soon as she crashed into the ground, she jumped to her feet and tried to escape into the distance, like a streak of lightning. Mahoney flew very fast, but the goat monster was even faster. Bleeding angrily, the goat monster gave chase. Meanwhile, Yellow Thirk was also preoccupied, running as fast as he could along the boundary wall. Behind him, numerous marks of 8 diagrams kept appearing on the boundary wall. Boom, 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 boom. As the marks exploded, they formed huge holes on the boundary wall, as if an invisible giant beast had sunk its teeth into it. If Yellow Thirk dared slow down, he risked having a mark of 8 diagrams catch up to him. Once that happened, the punches would follow. The instant a mark of 8 diagrams landed on Yellow Thirk's body, a fist radiance already exploded on him all at once. In his peak state, Fuxi was a force to be reckoned with. Even a single strike from him could pose a huge threat to any Eternal Realm warriors. Slowly but surely, he forced the Yellow Thirk to a dead end. Bang! Before Yellow Thirk could figure out what to do next, the fist radiance and the mark of 8 diagrams exploded on his body. The power in those moves was so destructive that it rampaged within his body. Yellow Thirk slammed heavily into the boundary wall. Spitting out a mouthful of blood, his face paled as his body weakened rapidly. He knew he couldn't defeat Fuxi, but he never thought it would end so miserably. "How did you make such a rapid progress with your strength?" Yellow Thirk looked at Fuxi piteously, his tone full of mixed emotions. Fuxi floated in the air, looking down at the Yellow Thirk. "I'm not really fast in my cultivation." A sly smile crept on his face. "Instead, you're too slow. After you joined the element spirit race, you unconsciously slacked off on cultivation. How much do you know about the 3 purities stage?" Some time ago, Fuxi, Yellow Thirk, and Divine Farmer were all roughly on the same level of strength. Back then, it never would have crossed Fuxi's mind that he would defeat Yellow Thirk with ease. However, after reaching the Eternal Realm, Yellow Thirk and the others had grown lax under the protection of the element spirit race. The resources granted to them by the element spirit race had indeed helped them improve by leaps and bounds over a certain period of time. However, this meant their activities were limited. They couldn't explore the areas that the element spirit race forbade them from entering. So, while they might have been protected, they also had little room for exploration and growth. On the other hand, things were different for Fuxi and the Snake Goddess. They had to take huge risks every step of the way in Stage 33. Even if the element spirit civilization controlled the exit for Stage 33, even they hadn't completely explored every nook and cranny of the stage. There were still a large number of areas that remained a mystery to them. Fuxi couldn't count how many times he'd risked his life to explore new areas. However, he had grown stronger each time. It was because he had chosen to take the rougher path that he had grown stronger than the other masters at the Eternal Realm. Yellow Thirk stared at Fuxi wordlessly, unable to come up with a response. Admittedly, he was jealous of Fuxi's great power. If he had known things would turn out like this, he might have made different choices. But it was too late for regrets. This was the path he had chosen. After a moment of silence, Yellow Thirk suddenly smiled. With a crazed look in his eyes, he threw his head back and laughed. Do you really think you've won this war? Fuxi clenched his fist. At least, I've won against you. A mark of 8 diagrams appeared on Yellow Thirch's body, and Fuxi threw out another incredibly powerful punch. Boom! The earth-splitting power of the punch exploded on Yellow Thirch's body. However, as the dust cleared, Yellow Thirch still leaned quietly against the boundary wall, unscathed. There was an invisible space in front of him which had blocked the blow completely. Fuxi's eyes narrowed in realization. Angrily, he whipped his head upwards to look to the sky. There was only one person in the entire chaos who would be able to control space this way, Othniel, one of the Chaos Ancient Gods. Something in Fuxi's eyes began to burn like crazy. There was a huge gap of strength between an Eternal Realm Master and the Chaos Ancient Gods. Still, even when he was imprisoned at the bottom of the chaos, Fuxi had always wondered if he was capable of killing a Chaos Ancient God. Chapter 3449, A Huge Figure. Back then, Fuxi had challenged Gerald, but he failed. In turn, Gerald had taught him a hard lesson. What made it more impressive for Gerald was that even though he was in a bad situation at that time, he was still able to defeat Fuxi. However, Fuxi had never accepted his fate. He went on to find ways to suppress the truth on the other shore since it was at a higher level than the chaos in some way. That was why when he felt the space truth's suppressive power, an immensely strong fighting intent filled his heart. You want to take all my powers by just folding the space? He sneered. Then, his arm swelled up, and he released his strength once more. Boom, 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 boom. A mark of the 8 diagrams and fist radiance exploded in front of Yellow Thirk, but it didn't have any impact on him at all. It was as if they were in 2 separate worlds. Yellow Thirk leaned against the boundary wall with an arrogant smile and mocked Fuxi's fruitless efforts. He calmly stood up and casually reached out his hand. The Yellow Thirk sword suddenly appeared on his palm. Upon closer look, it appeared that the surrounding space was a little distorted as Yellow Thirk moved. It turned out that he was isolated in another space. Swish! Yellow Thirk gently waved his sword and leisurely walked towards Fuxi step by step. Buzz! With a slight buzzing sound, a holy way with intense killing intent slashed towards Fuxi's head. In return, Fuxi punched the incoming attack. Swoosh! Surprisingly, he missed, and his punch went past the holy way. They were in separate spaces that did not intersect. Boom! On the contrary, Yellow Thirch's sword attack hit Fuxi accurately. Fuxi had restrained Yellow Thirch before, but that didn't mean that the latter was weak. There was a muffled sound, and then Fuxi fell to the ground. Yellow Thirch raised his sword, and he looked calm again. Suddenly, he launched another sword attack. His spiritual sense flowed through as he swung his sword again. Splash! A large cut immediately appeared on the ground, but Fuxi already dodged it using the grand teleportation technique. How can you escape under Othniel's gaze? The voice of Yellow Thirch boomed from all directions. At that moment, he seemed to have heard something and waved his sword towards that direction. As the holy way advanced, a passage opened up in the space in front of him, and Fuxi emerged out of it. Boom! The holy way hit Fuxi again. After all, the Chaos Ancient God understood the space much better than Fuxi did. Fuxi had changed the space channel by using the grand teleportation technique, but Othniel pulled him back and the sword strike hit him again. Even though Fuxi's body was powerful, he could not withstand 2 sword strikes from Yellow Thirch in a row. He spat a mouthful of blood and chose not to use the grand teleportation technique. Instead, he flew straight into the distance. However, Yellow Thirch wasn't in a hurry to chase after him. He even playfully watched Fuxi as if the latter was a domesticated pet. There seemed to be an invisible transparent cover in front of Fuxi. Fuxi couldn't jump out of it, so he would have to return to the starting point. No matter how powerful you are still at the Eternal Realm. You can't fight against the truth. Once again, Yellow Thirk paced in the air as he slowly moved with his sword in one hand. Meanwhile, the accumulated power of the holy way in his sword became more and more intense. If everything went well, Yellow Thirk hoped to kill Fuxi himself. He didn't want to bother Othniel to aid him. Generally speaking, the Chaos Ancient Gods were the foundation of the chaos. Once they participated in the mortal battles, the situation would become quite complicated. According to Yellow Thirch's plan, they were supposed to abduct Zen while they helped Usman increase his strength. If they successfully executed both, then the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race would be forever invincible. However, things didn't go smoothly. Now that Othniel was directly involved in the battle, they might have to do everything in advance before they made full preparations. But no matter what, he was already invincible because Othniel coated him with a layer of space membrane. Swish! Yellow Thirk slashed Fuxi with his sword once more, and Fuxi dodged it using his fast speed instead of the spatial transference. Although he successfully evaded one strike, he couldn't dodge all the follow-up strikes. In only a short amount of time, Fuxi acquired several horrible wounds, and half of his face had gotten disfigured. He looked miserable. So much for that. Yellow Thirch's eyes glinted coldly, and then 3 more holy ways gathered on his sword. For him, Fuxi was just like an immovable target. If he couldn't even deal with Fuxi in this situation, he would be worthless. Buzz! As his sword, which contained 3 holy ways sounded, innumerable sword shadows flew towards Fuxi at full speed. Just when he thought that Fuxi was powerless now, the latter's aura suddenly changed. A bright green beam of light lit up his eyes, as if an immensely powerful life force was infused into his body. All of his severe wounds healed in a second. The green light only lasted for a while, and then it turned red. His aura also became quite aggressive. Whoosh! In the next moment, he swiftly pounced on Yellow Thirk. Even if Yellow Thirk had the protection of the space membrane, a chill ran down his spine. Instead of swinging his sword to fight back, he instinctively dodged and retreated. Crack! The space membrane that covered him exploded, and then his left arm was ripped off by Fuxi. Still, his decision to retreat saved his life. Had he relied on the space membrane and counterattacked, Fuxi could have killed him. He pulled a long face once he had landed far away. He also looked up at the sky like Fuxi did before. What he had been worried about really happened. Another Chaos Ancient God had a hand in their affair. Just then, a giant scorpion shadow appeared in the separate Amber Province and other hundreds of provinces, including the Bloom Divine Province and the Pear Hill. Many creatures raised their heads to look at the enormous scorpion, and all of them had mixed feelings. First was that they felt deeply attached to the scorpion, and second was they also feared it, as if it would destroy them right then and there. Gerald was the Chaos Ancient God who controlled the truth of life. In the early days of the Source World, Gerald could interfere with the cycle of life and even create creatures. Therefore, it was safe to say that all living creatures in the current chaos originated from him. Furthermore, he was the ruler of all living creatures. Not only could he create lives, but he could destroy them too. As soon as Gerald's figure appeared, another enormous figure also emerged on the other side. It was a gigantic one-eyed monster with a strange stooping body. It was none other than Othniel, who had coated Yellow Thirk with a layer of space membrane. Haven't you figured it out yet? Othniel's voice echoed throughout the hundreds of provinces. The Chaos Ancient Gods also had their stands. From their perspective, the Purge Way was clearly in line with their interests. That was why Othniel was willing to help Yellow Thirk. Despite that, Othniel didn't want to fight with Gerald. They both came from the last chaotic era, and although they belonged to different races, their races got along well with each other at that time. Therefore, he still tried to persuade Gerald to stand with him even now. Chapter 3450, Exile. A hush fell over the skies. Suddenly, Gerald's eyes lit up with a green light. Buzz! In the invisible ship, a small dot of green light flew out of Zen's body. It was no other than number 9527, a soul fragment of Gerald. Back then, Gerald had been optimistic about Zen. Now, he wanted to know if he had made the right choice. As the others of the black ship watched the green dot of light float out of the invisible ship, no one dared stop it. Although number 9527 was just a weak soul fragment, the aura it emanated was the same as that of Gerald. Whoosh! The green light dot rose steadily, soaring through the sky until it shot into Gerald's forehead. In Gerald's mind, he was surrounded in the middle by many brain masters, like a human emperor, awaiting No 9527's arrival. When the green dot of light entered Gerald's head, number 9527 emerged and stood in front of its master. Suddenly, number 9527 did a very human thing, it bowed towards its master. You or me, the master said confusedly. Why do you use such etiquette with your own self? Number 9527 remained silent. Gerald thought for a moment, then finally said, You've been gone for a long time. Have you grown attached to your own consciousness? To some extent, the soul fragment was also an independent individual. After being with Zen for so long, number 9527 had gradually developed its own personality. It even didn't want to go back to its master. In its own way, it wanted to be a special number 9527, not just a soul fragment. Yes, master, number 9527 replied sincerely. I want to leave you. For good. As soon as number 9527 spoke this, the brain masters surrounding Gerald broke into indignant chaos. How dare a mere soul fragment ask to break away from its master's consciousness? In the brain world, this was an absolutely outrageous act. It was impossible for brain masters and soul fragments to be this individualistic. You have made a great contribution and successfully assisted Zen to the eternal realm. Spread yourself out before me, Gerald ordered. Once I understand what has happened to you during this period of time, I can allow you to leave. Without any hesitation, number 9527 spread out itself. Countless fragments were instantly deciphered by Gerald. From Zen's journey to the source world, to the scenes of his encounters on the other shore, all of them were laid out before him. At the beginning, Gerald was grateful to see how number 9527 was of great help to Zen. Although Zen on his own was extraordinary, with the help of number 9527, he was able to reach greater heights. However, as Gerald kept absorbing, he noticed that as Zen advanced on the other shore, he no longer needed number 9527 as much. So much so, that at some point, number 9527 was practically negligible. Later, with the appearance of the regal jade spirit and the primeval Lord of Heaven, number 9527 paled in comparison. Nevertheless, Gerald was astonished to see what Zen had been through. When Zen replaced the element spirit race to control the blooming jade stage, he felt even more shocked. However, just as he felt like he couldn't be any more impressed, he reached the part where Zen entered the eternal scroll painting. He became more stunned. Although number 9527 had kept silent and did not disturb Zen when Zen was in the painting, it roughly understood the communication between Zen and the primeval Lord of Heaven. Through 9527, Gerald had seen the center of the scroll painting, and known about the Four Spirits sect, and the primeval Lord of Heaven's guesses. All this happened in the span of seconds. In the blink of an eye, Gerald had fully understood what number 9527 and Zen had been through together. He gently shut his huge eyes, and then opened them again slowly, as he felt conflicting emotions rage within him. Zen's performance was completely beyond his expectations, and even beyond his imagination. Previously, Gerald had been a little hesitant, but at this moment, he no longer had any misgivings. I understand now, Gerald's voice rang out in the air, and it was easily transmitted to the ears of all the creatures from over 100 provinces, sounding very peaceful. Let go of Zen and retreat. Then we can forget what happened today. Hearing the choice of Gerald, Fuxi and the snake goddess immediately heaved a sigh of relief, while Yellow Thirk and the others looked on coldly. On the other side of the sky, Othniel said, You still haven't figured out that in this world, we are. But Gerald interrupted his persuasion directly. Not another word. I've seen more than you know. I won't believe their words anymore. Buzz. A blue light flashed across Othniel's one huge eye. Instantly, his aura became menacingly strong. You really want to fight with me? Othniel asked once more. I have only one condition, Gerald replied decisively. Let go of Zen. Just from studying No 9527's memories, he had fully realized Zen's importance to this world. His value was so great, and Gerald was willing to sacrifice his life if it meant keeping Zen alive. Buzz. Othniel's single eye shook wildly. The concentrated power of space shook crazily in his eye. Othniel had the highest space authority in the chaos. Now that he couldn't reach a consensus with Gerald, he planned to exile him. Swoosh. Gerald was well aware of how great Othniel's power was. However, there was no way he was going to allow Othniel to exile him easily. Putting aside the deleting space, even if Gerald was only exiled into a corner of the chaos, it would still take him time to return to the source world. Bang, bang, bang. As Gerald spurted toward Othniel, invisible space walls appeared and blocked his way. Each space wall was as strong as the boundary wall, but to Gerald, they were as fragile as glass. With ease, Gerald smashed each of them at a touch. Even though the space walls did no real damage to Gerald, it did slow him down momentarily. Before Gerald even had the chance to attack Othniel, Othniel's eye had already gathered enough space power. Without hesitating, he shot a thick blue light onto Gerald's body. Once the blue light disappeared, so did Gerald. Ha ha ha. Othniel's laughter roared throughout the skies. Then, he shrank his body, from a huge godlike scale to that of a human. His appearance also transformed into that of Mount. This was the complete Mount. Next, Othniel appeared beside Yellow Thirk, and pulled at the air in front of him. Suddenly, space itself seemed to warp and distort all over the separate Amber Province. He had pulled the important figures to his side. They included the Divine Farmer, who was currently a goat monster, Mahoney, the members of the Black Ship, and the Snake Goddess. They didn't see this coming. As space itself seemed to fold before them, they hadn't reacted before Othniel pulled them towards him. Then, Othniel stared at Zen as he saw through the invisible ship. He felt as though he had stumbled upon an invaluable treasure. Stretching out his hand, he wanted to pull Zen towards him, too. However, even under his pull, Zen remained unmoved. His invincible space truth had no effect at this moment. Chapter 3451, The Descending Man in Black. The captain of the Black Ship, Shira, and the others also stared at the brass man, feeling quite confounded. The brass man shrugged his shoulders while carrying Zen to show that he had no understanding of the situation. The Chaos Ancient God was unable to retrieve someone from a Holy Soul Realm warrior. Even Othniel's expression became quite unnatural. Othniel reached out his hand towards the brass man again, and the irregular power of space folded around Zen. However, when the power of space was applied to Zen, it vanished without a trace. Zen had become like a black hole in the shape of his body. He could absorb all forms of power. After failing twice in a row, Othniel finally relented and quit. His figure flashed, and he came to the invisible ship. He glanced at the captain and then reached out his hand to grab hold of Zen. The brass man looked at the captain in a mute appeal for help. Given the situation, if the captain did not make a move, the brass man would not take action either. As Othniel's hand grabbed out, the white fog created by the brass man's combat dragon absorb began to thin and dissipate, and Zen was taken away by Othniel. Before leaving, Othniel glanced back at Edith and flippantly commented, "This spaceship is very exquisite. It will make a fine tomb for you." Once Othniel finished speaking, his figure disappeared, and he reappeared beside Yellow Thirk still holding on to Zen. After they had left, Edith suddenly sensed trouble brewing and exclaimed in a state of panic, "Captain, I can't control the invisible ship." The invisible ship was Edith's other shore token, but now it was no longer under her control. "Your other shore token is out of control." Shira arched her eyebrows. "Yes." Edith stared at the transparent invisible ship in horror. "The invisible ship is shrinking." The invisible ship, which was thousands of feet in size, had steadily begun shrinking. In less than 9 seconds, it had already shrunk by half. The people of the Black Ship, who were in the cabin, would soon be squashed by the invisible ship. The members of the Black Ship used their grand teleportation technique at the same time, trying to teleport from the invisible ship. However, the instant they used this technique to escape, they were surprised, and their expressions filled with fear. There was no fluctuation in the space. It must be Othniel's ploy to have trapped them here using some skill. It would be a small feat for the Chaos Ancient God, who was in charge of the space truth, to trap them. "Captain, what should we do? We are trapped here." While the crowd panicked, the invisible ship had shrunk to the size of 10 feet, and there was only one shoulder width on the left side and the right side. Tomos from the Ear Mouse race and Shira could still fit in the small ship, but the ship was not large enough to accommodate the tall and strong brass man. The brass man stretched out his hands, trying to push the invisible ship outwards and stop it from shrinking more. However, he had used almost all of his strength, yet he couldn't stop the invisible ship's shrinking even an inch. The power which was shrinking the space was not something the brass man could oppose. The bones in his body creaked loudly, and his face turned cherry red. Crack, crack, crack. An explosive sound emanated from the brass man's chest, and the bones of his arms suddenly broke completely off. Meanwhile, other members of the Black Ship, such as Shira and Edith, had also joined hands to stop the ship from shrinking. However, even though all the members of the Black Ship took action, the invisible ship continued shrinking at the original speed. After a short while, they could no longer even turn around. If the ship continued to shrink, they would all be squeezed to a pulp. Then Shira craned her neck to look at the captain. It would be too late if they didn't summon that man now. Just as Shira was becoming desperate, a golden circle of light suddenly appeared behind the captain. Within the golden circle of light stood a man in a black robe. The man had a pair of deep eyes, and their depths seemed to be filled with stories and secrets. The faint stubble on his chin hinted at an unruly character. "Do you need any help?" Crack, he stretched out his feet and kicked up against the transparent wall of the invisible ship. It seemed unnervingly easy for him to do that. The ship shook violently and stopped shrinking. As the man began exerting his strength on the invisible ship, the unbreakable space barrier around the ship shattered into thousands of pieces with a bang. He gently hitched up his robe and flew upwards like a black goshawk. At the same time, a rumbling sound echoed from the sky. A terrifying energy quietly swept past and then disappeared without a trace. This was the punishment of truth that could not descend. Othniel didn't think the members of the black ship would ever escape. In his mind, it was inconceivable they would be able to escape from the invisible ship. After he had dealt with the black ship, there were only 2 targets of the perihil remaining. Since he made his move, he would not let any of his targets escape. But moments after he left the ship, he felt a huge movement coming from behind him. Othniel turned around and saw the man in black. His cold eyes flashed a trace of seriousness. In the chaos, even the strongest Eternal Realm warrior couldn't oppose the chaos ancient gods who controlled the truth. Therefore, even Fuxi and the black ship had not been taken seriously by Othniel. At least, Othniel felt that these Eternal Realm warriors posed no threat to him. However, the man in black who had now appeared made Othniel feel an instinctive vigilance. This vigilance only happened when he was facing other chaos ancient gods. He didn't expect that he would have such a feeling when facing a mere human, and this left him feeling a little confused. Fuxi and the snake goddess, who had been pulled here by Othniel, quietly exchanged nervous looks. Of course, they knew that the man in black had descended from the other shore and must be a member of the Nihility race. However, the members of the Nihility race always took mysterious and unpredictable actions, and they were unable to determine the man in black's identity. In fact, not long ago, the man in black had appeared in stage 32 of the other shore. If Pierce had been present, he would have been able to recognize him. However, if the Nihility race could duel Othniel to the death, Fuxi and the others would celebrate seeing it. "Who are you?" asked Othniel. The man in black sniffed the air, revealing some enjoyment on his face. "I've been looking forward to this moment for a long time. Even though more than 1,000 chaotic eras have passed, the scent of this world still hasn't changed." The man in black said without answering Othniel's question. Othniel's face darkened, and he asked in a low voice, "Tell me who you are." As he spoke, he suddenly lashed out at the man in black, and a crescent-shaped space crack hurtled straight towards the man in black. The space crack that the Chaos Ancient God had so casually created was extremely lethal. Facing the space crack, the man in black smiled faintly and extended his palm to block the crack as if swatting a fly. Sizzle! When the man's palm met the space crack, a grating noise sounded, and the space crack disintegrated. Then his lips formed a warm smile. "It doesn't matter who I am. The most important thing is that man. You have to hand him over to me," the man in black said, pointing at Zen, who was draped over Othniel's shoulder. "Not in your wildest dreams," responded Othniel. If it weren't for the fact that Zen was able to absorb all the energy and couldn't be transported away, Othniel would have hidden Zen in a corner of the chaos as he had done to Gerald. If Othniel had done so, it wouldn't matter how strong the man in black was. Finding a human in the vast chaos was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Chapter 3452, Blind Spots. The eyes of the man in black clothes were devoid of emotions. When people looked at him, they got an impression of a tightened bow simmering with a surging power that could be released any time. His emotions were like deep water in a tranquil lake. He looked outwardly composed, as if he was merely taking a walk in his courtyard. But everyone could sense that there was great power concealed below the surface. No one could see through his real thoughts, not even Othniel. "I asked nicely, but since it didn't work, I'll have to use my fists," the man in black said in a flat tone. It was as if declaring war on a chaos ancient god was quite common for him. Although Othniel considered him a strong enemy, he had no intention of backing down. He threw Zen into the void and pointed at him so that a space cage instantly formed around Zen. Even if Zen were to suddenly wake up and fight back, he would not be able to escape from the space cage. No one could help him break it from the outside either. It would be a difficult task even for the Eternal Realm Masters present. But much to the shock of everyone watching, the moment Zen touched the bottom of the space cage, he completely absorbed the energy shaping the floor and his body was quickly dropped from the cage. Everyone was amused and was rendered speechless. Shira couldn't help but snigger. Zen's physical body had been in such a strange state that even Othniel had made mistakes dealing with it more than once. They had so far noticed that Zen would absorb all the power around him except for the brass man's combat dragon absorb. Perhaps it was a mere coincidence, or perhaps it was because of the inferior power of the combat dragon absorb. For what it was worth, Shira's conjecture was very close to the truth. Zen didn't really absorb all sorts of power. The process only occurred according to the map on the square. It was true that the power of the combat dragon absorb was not superior enough for Zen to absorb it. Othniel's power, on the other hand, was an excellent option. Every time Othniel used the power of space against Zen, Zen's body immediately devoured it. This occurred multiple times before a new light column appeared in the space-time quadrant of the map, rising rapidly. Even when Zen fell from the sky, the black-clothed man looked to be in no hurry to snatch him. Othniel was embarrassed, teleporting almost instantly to Zen's side. He caught Zen, flew up to the yellow Thirk, and handed Zen over to him as he said, "Protect him well." And then, Othniel rose back to the same height as the man in black. Frowning in confusion, Yellow Thirk turned to look at Fuxi and the snake goddess, whom Othniel still had in his trap. The Pear Hill was a great force not only because it had the support of the Chaos Ancient God. Fuxi and the snake goddess themselves were very powerful warriors. Whatever was happening was heavily disadvantageous to the snake goddess and Fuxi. Irrespective of who won, the result would be unacceptable for Pear Hill. The best result for them, perhaps, would be for Othniel and the man to fight like Kilkenny cats. But Fuxi and the snake goddess remained quite calm and composed. Did they have a trump card up their sleeve? As Yellow Thirk wondered about this, a dazzling blue light, even brighter than the sun, shone out of the sky. Everyone squinted in the sudden glare of light. When the blue flare finally disappeared, a long transparent blue saber appeared in Othniel's hand. It was obviously a weapon he had created with the power of space. Othniel rarely chose to fight face to face. Most times, he only needed to exile his opponents, the way Mount had exiled Zen into the deleting space. Othniel had exiled Gerald as well, when he hadn't been careful enough. But this man before him caused a deep need of annihilation within Othniel. With a sudden wave of the long saber in his hand, he split the space in front of him in half, creating a huge space crack. The space crack extended like the mouth of a huge fish as it loomed over the man in black. The man in black raised an eyebrow and gently tilted his body. A wisp of cyan light thick as a finger surged into the sky, shooting up to millions of feet away. A 3-foot-long thin sword appeared in his hand, his usual weapon, the cyan misty sword. Flash, my sword. The moment the man in black brandished his sword, he disappeared into thin air. He and his sword had turned into a cyan glow that spread throughout the sky, shooting towards Othniel. The space crack that Othniel had created disappeared the moment it met the cyan glow. The space power seemed unable to withstand even a single blow. Othniel was not that shocked even though his first strike had so easily dissolved. Instead, he looked up at the sky, trying to track the man in black's position. If they were in the same space, no one could ever avoid Othniel's detection. It was his talent that neither did he need to search for his opponent's aura nor did he have to use his spiritual sense to scan the space. He simply sensed everything that existed in the space around him. This ability of Othniel's was similar to the one that Usman had. To his surprise, though, the man in black seemed to have completely disappeared in the cyan glow. How was this possible? Othniel was gobsmacked for a moment, finding it hard to accept this truth. The space truth is the highest rule in the chaos. You can't completely grasp it even as a son of truth. What you've comprehended is only a small part of it. The voice of the man in black sounded from behind Othniel. Othniel turned around abruptly, bringing the space saber in his hand slashing down in the direction of the voice. Others might have misjudged the direction, but Othniel never made such mistakes. He struck the sword 3 times in a row. The azure blue space slashes were fast enough to split everything in their path, including the space itself. A large number of space cracks emerged as the space slashes swept across the sky. The sky was like a book, and these space cracks were like pages that had been torn off from the book. The space itself looked miraculous under Othniel's formidable power. The structure of the space itself was completely destroyed. If the man in black was hiding himself in the space, he would split into countless pieces as well. But Othniel still couldn't see any signs of the man. Since what you've grasped is only a part of the space truth, you also have blind spots in space. The man's voice echoed again. Othniel lifted the space saber but discovered that he couldn't determine the direction of the voice this time. The man's voice seemed to come from the depths of his mind. How was he doing that? Just as Othniel was looking around incredulously, a beam of cyan light suddenly shot out from behind him. It pierced through Othniel's back and continued to shoot straight ahead, crossing several provinces, boundary walls, and thick earth along the way before it shot straight out of the source world and into the chaos. Since the cyan light was only as thick as a little finger, it didn't create a hole large enough for the chaotic energy from the outside to flow into the source world. But it had killed innumerable innocent creatures on its way out. The small wound wasn't much trouble for Othniel. He only felt a slight pain in his back, and he brought his saber down behind him a few more times. Large areas of space were destroyed, but the man in black seemed not to exist. Othniel's strikes had nearly destroyed everything in the space behind him, but he still failed to touch the man in black. Chapter 3453, Direct Exile. Generally speaking, the self-healing ability of the space in the source world was quite strong. The space usually repaired itself quite quickly after it was damaged. To put it simply, the space cracks created by even the mighty warriors of the other shore realm only lasted for a moment before they disappeared without a trace. However, Othniel's impact on the space was too much. The dilapidated space was exposed and formed strange scenes. "You're just a coward who is good at hiding." He tried several times, but he failed to touch the man in black every time. Now he felt a little anxious. A powerful being like Othniel knew almost everything. There were few secrets that they couldn't understand. Thus, he naturally felt uneasy when he faced an unsolvable problem. Buzz. At that moment, another ray of cyan light bloomed on his forehead. This time, he didn't dodge. His eyes glowed blue, and the space in his head had changed. As soon as the cyan light entered his head, it refracted 90 degrees and ran through towards the other side. Whoosh! The cyan light flew towards the direction where Fuxi and the snake goddess located. Although the snake goddess dodged very fast, blood flowed out from her strong, graceful leg. Still, she remained nonchalant, and she didn't even frown. The injury was nothing to her. On the contrary, Fuxi's eyebrows furrowed tightly. In turn, the snake goddess personally reassured Fuxi and told him to not get agitated, but to be patient. But it was not Fuxi's style to hold back his emotions. "Now that this man in black is here, let's take this chance to kill Othniel together," Fuxi told the snake goddess through telepathy. The snake goddess slightly shook her head. "Even if we managed to kill Othniel by working together, how would we deal with the man in black from the Nihility race?" she asked. Fuxi's eyes only darkened at her question, which was rather rare for him. He seldom felt discouraged, because except for the Three Purities stage, there was no opponent he was afraid of on the other shore or in the source world. But the man in black was stronger than anyone he had met before. Fuxi didn't think he had any chance to win against him. "There will be a chance," said the snake goddess in a gentle voice with a smile in her wise eyes. "Fuxi, be patient." No matter how irritable Fuxi was, he would calm down when he heard the soft voice of the snake goddess. Now, Othniel might have mastered the method to fight against the cyan misty sword. A small space stood out and blocked the cyan light whenever it lit up. The cyan light that could pierce through millions of feet deviated due to the reflection of the space. Swish, swish, swish. However, the cyan light was too powerful. It could extend up to several or even dozens of provinces, and all the creatures in its way would suffer. On the other side of the separate Amber Province, the great warriors of the Oneness Sky Palace stared at the mighty warriors of the Bearing race, the Divine Farmer race and the New Moon race. Their previous fight had gotten suspended because of Othniel's and Gerald's appearances. Naturally, their battle became meaningless since beings with higher levels of power had arrived. The battle would come to an end when the fight between the great warriors at the higher level ended. Right after that, however, Gerald suddenly disappeared. A few moments later, rays of immensely strong cyan light began to shoot everywhere. The warriors of the Holy Soul Realm and the Chaotic Source Realm didn't have a physical body as powerful as the Snake Goddess. It was bearable if the cyan light hit their hands or feet since they would only lose their arms or legs at most. However, they would die if it hit their heads or chests. The two sides who had been confronting each other in the air finally withdrew tacitly and dodged. However, it was useless, because after all, the cyan light bypassed almost any kind of obstructions. Swish, bang, a ray of cyan light pierced through the sky and hit Zen's body, but it did not puncture him. That was the first time that the cyan sword radiance failed to penetrate something. After Zen's body had blocked it, the cyan sword radiance turned into a pool of liquid that glimmered with cyan light. It did not last long, however, as Zen's body quickly absorbed it. Yellow Thirk had put Zen above his head to use him as a shield, but he wasn't sure if Zen could block the cyan light or not. When he saw that Zen was still safe and sound even after the cyan light had hit him, he was utterly shocked. This guy is really extraordinary. It's a waste of time if you only hide in the dark, Othniel said as he moved slowly. His eyes divided the entire world into blocks, and he shifted his attention to the energy reaction inside those blocks. After all, he was the son of truth of space. As he continued to observe, he gradually understood how the man in black made it. Countless figures flashed inside the space blocks. Those figures were the man in black. The man in black did not disappear. Instead, he moved at an incredible speed. According to the common space rules, one had to create a short distance or even a long distance space channel for the grand teleportation or instant teleportation. Only then could they cross from one end to the other end of the space channel. However, the man in black didn't need to do that. He could appear at any point then disappear at another point on his accord. Even Othniel couldn't do such a thing. You can't possibly refract all my sword radiance, nor can you stay cautious all the time. Just 3 sword strikes are enough. It's impressive to kill a son of truth with 3 sword strikes, the man in black said from the space. As he spoke, his sword released more concentrated cyan sword radiance. The long sword radiance, which was as thick as a finger, was like a thick thread. While Othniel was at the center, it refracted in all directions like mad. In this way, the mighty warriors of the eternal realm, including the snake goddess, Fuxi, and Mahoney, were in a more dangerous situation. The sword radiance came and pierced through them from time to time, and they almost couldn't dodge it. Only Yellow Thirk remained unharmed because he placed Zen above his head as a natural shield. Crack, like the man in black had said, Othniel couldn't be careful all the time. Although he could refract 99.9% of the cyan sword radiance away, there would always be a little cyan sword light left as time went by. Finally, one ray of cyan sword radiance dodged Othniel's refraction and punctured his shoulder. The second sword strike. The voice of the man in black came again. Othniel's face darkened. The man in black had just said that he could kill him with 3 sword strikes. Based on the cyan light's lethality, not even 30 or 300 strikes could cause any substantial damage to him, let alone only 3 strikes. Yet, according to the man in black, there might be some other consequences if the cyan light hit him thrice. Or was it just a threat? The 3 Purities stage was a magical place with all kinds of strange abilities. At first, Othniel wanted to deal with the man in black slowly while he tried to come up with a solution, but after he felt that things had gotten much worse, he suddenly looked ferocious. His eyes suddenly turned into 2 weird blue energy entities and abruptly exploded. At the same time, a large block appeared covering dozens of miles around the man in black. Then the block disappeared, together with the man inside it. Chapter 3454, Uncle. A space which was 30 miles wide, 30 miles high, and 30 miles long had been deleted from the chaos and exiled into the deleting space. On all sides, everything squeezed into the gap to fill in the disappeared space. The ground itself was pulled up. A majestic mountain, 30 miles high, appeared out of thin air. The last time, Zen had quickly returned after Mount exiled him. This attracted Othniel's attention. The outside world thought that the Land of Ashes, also known as the deleting space, was controlled by Othniel. In fact, he couldn't affect anything in the deleting space. The information left by the Sons of Truth on the other shore seemed to indicate that the deleting space was under the control of Othniel. But much had changed over the past few hundred chaotic eras. The deleting space had undergone a dramatic transformation, and Othniel had lost control of it. He didn't know for certain what had happened inside. All he knew was that he had the ability to exile people and things into the deleting space. However, he had no power to delete the creatures and things within that space. Zen's safe return from the deleting space had shaken Othniel. He immediately tried to invade the deleting space to reclaim his authority over it. None of Othniel's attempts to regain control was successful. Othniel had always felt that something strange was in the deleting space, something that he could not track or detect. It was a sore spot in his heart. In this case, Othniel would not have chosen to delete the man in black unless he had no other choice. After all, it might prove ineffective. However, since the man in black had been deleted, Othniel seized this opportunity to take Zen away. The man in black frowned as he floated in the deleting space. He raised a hand to pat his head, muttering, "I was too careless. I forgot this trick." It was not a good thing for him to be exiled to this place. He had come with the help of the descending ring, but now the descending ring had grown dim. He had lost contact with the other shore. What if he was truly trapped in this cursed space, unable to find his way out? It would cause enormous problems for the Nihility race. As he floated, the man in black suddenly realized the strangeness of his situation. Shouldn't the things in the deleting space be completely destroyed? Why is this place? To his surprise, after some time, he noticed something visible in the distance. He squinted. It seemed to be a vast, endless, floating wasteland. He stared at this unexpected sight, feeling more confused than ever. His eyes widened when he saw two figures flying in his direction. One was Zia, and the other was Jeffrey. At first the man in black doubted if it was truly Zia. But when he confirmed the truth of Zia's identity, twin flames began burning in his eyes. When he was facing Othniel, a powerful chaos ancient god, he had managed to act cool and collected, as though nothing had happened. But when he saw Zia, the man in black could no longer restrain the anger that had burned in his heart for countless years. His gaze was filled with killing intent. A low buzz sounded as he attacked. He tapped the cyan misty sword, and a thin ray of cyan light shot towards Zia. Not long after Zia and Jeffrey returned, a loud noise could be heard coming from the deleting space. This was a common occurrence, so Zia didn't take it seriously. He brought Jeffrey directly there to see what was going on. But before he had even noticed the man in black, he saw the extremely sharp and deadly ray of cyan light rushing towards him. His eyes narrowed when he sensed the power of the cyan light. He instantly waved his hand, and a golden whip lashed out like a poisonous dragon at the ray of cyan light. The golden and cyan lights converged in midair. Zia waved his golden whip, forming many small spirals, and soon the cyan light was swallowed up. Jeffrey hung back, watching the attack and counterattack with surprise. He had always considered Zia to be much stronger than his father. Despite the fact that he was powerless in the abstruse energy world, Zia had never met an opponent in the chaos. He had a grim look on his face that Jeffrey had not seen before. Jeffrey caught sight of the man in black and wondered who he was. Why had he initiated a fight with Zia as soon as he arrived, without even speaking to him first? But the fight was not over. Rays of cyan light shot out from afar, and some of them headed straight for Jeffrey. Zia's face turned cold. His lips formed a sneer as he raised the golden whip in his hand and flicked it, causing a loud explosion in midair. The whip reformed into an arc of bright golden light which lashed towards the cyan rays. The previously invincible cyan lights seemed fragile compared to the golden lights. Every time a golden light bloomed, a cyan ray was drawn away, turning into a cyan lotus that slowly dissipated into space. The cyan rays blasted towards Zia one after another, and he lashed out at each one with his golden whip. In the span of a few seconds, 36 rays of golden light bloomed, and 36 cyan lotuses appeared and dissipated. The fierce clash of energy was a spectacular, dazzling scene. Jeffrey watched with great fascination. He knew that although the colorful bursts of energy were beautiful, they were also terrifying. A single ray of light could kill him instantly. His estimation of Zia rose, and he now believed more than ever that Zia was immensely powerful. Although all his attacks had been dispersed, the man in black seemed undaunted. He raised his cyan misty sword once more. 6 black flags appeared behind him. Thin black energy lines flowed on the surface of each flag. These were known as the 6 soul flags. Zia raised an eyebrow. He called out, "Are you really planning to fight me to the death, uncle?" The cyan misty sword trembled in the man's hand. He drew a circle from top to bottom with himself at the center. Although there was no wind, the 6 soul flags fluttered, and a mysterious and indescribable aura spread out from his body. He shouted back, "You have the cheek to call me uncle." Again, a buzz signaled his impending attack. The black energy emanated by the 6 soul flags suddenly flowed inward, gathering on the surface of the cyan misty sword. The cyan glow of the sword intersected with the black energy, and the sword began to burn. Raising his sword, the man in black rushed towards Zia. Zia gently pushed Jeffrey, and an unseen force propelled Jeffrey away. In the face of such a powerful attack, he had no time to protect Jeffrey. "Let bygones be bygones. Why do you still keep the past in mind?" Zia said, lifting his own golden whip once more. Zia's god-lashing whip had been created by the primeval Lord of Heaven with Zia's root-level bloodline. It was his most powerful weapon. "Your master has said the same thing many times," the man in black said coldly. "It is nonsense." He was the Grand Master of Heaven whom Zen had met. He and the primeval Lord of Heaven had learned from the same master, so he was Zia's uncle. At first, Zia had not known if he was still alive. After all, when the 77th chaos ended, Zia had been exiled to the deleting space. Zia didn't know anything about what happened later on the other shore until Zen took him out from the deleting space. Although Zia had grown much since those days, he still found it deeply unsettling that the mere sight of him had spurred the Grand Master of Heaven to an immediate fight to the death. Chapter 3455, Passing the Ball. Within the 77th Chaos, there had been a great conflict between the Interception sect, created by the Grand Master of Heaven, and the Enlightenment sect, created by the Primeval Lord of Heaven. The reason behind this conflict was also related to the finale way. At the end of the battle, the Grand Master of Heaven had been defeated by Zia, and the foundation of the Interception sect had been destroyed beyond repair. The Grand Master of Heaven had led the remaining people of their sect to the other shore in an attempt to escape, and there they had quickly disappeared. In the past hundreds of chaotic eras, no one had ever seen the Grand Master of Heaven himself, or the members of the Interception sect. It was not until the Nihility race appeared out of the blue that the Grand Master of Heaven began to show his face once again. There was no known knowledge of what the Grand Master of Heaven had gone through, or how he had become the leader of the Nihility race during that time. The moment Zia had descended into the Bloom Divine Province, the Primeval Lord of Heaven had warned him of the Grand Master of Heaven, and to be cautious if he were to ever come across him. The latter had not moved on from when the Interception sect had been destroyed. Zia hadn't felt the need to take the words seriously at the time. He had thought that time would ease the pain, and erase the hatred in the Grand Master of Heaven's heart. However, when they had come across one another in the deleting space, fury and hatred had burned in the Grand Master of Heaven's eyes as he looked at Zia, regarding him as if they were old enemies. A metallic whoosh had cut through the air. With the cyan misty sword in hand, the Grand Master of Heaven had rushed towards Zia. The 6 soul flags in the distance quivered, and the black fire licking along the blade burned with heavy violence. Zia understood just how powerful the 6 soul flags were. He also knew that the Grand Master of Heaven had led the Nihility race to great power, and that they could easily stand up to the elemental spirit races near equals. His strength had grown exponentially. God-lashing whip. Zia struck out hard with his whip as he retreated. The resounding cracks caused by the whip were ear-piercing. As shadows danced and shimmied along the whip, the void began to tremble. What looked to be ripples appeared in the air, warping and distorting everything within their sight. The movement of the God-lashing whip was erratic, and had no pattern to follow as it sent golden shadows one after another into the void. Those countless shadows then melded together to create a long, narrow dragon shadow that immediately rushed the Grand Master of Heaven. The shadows seemed alive, sizzling and cracking as they moved. The Grand Master of Heaven thrust his sword in front of him and shifted forward. The black flames soared high, and ate away the golden shadows from the whip as they approached. When he had advanced to only a few dozen feet away from Zia, Zia relinquished his hold on his God-lashing whip and bowed to the Grand Master of Heaven with cupped hands. The Grand Master of Heaven paused, confused by the gesture. His eyes flashed with anger before turning cold. "Do you think this display will make me show mercy? Zia, how naive you are. No, I did not think you would show me mercy. Now is not the time for us to fight. I'm sorry that I have to do this to you," Zia said quietly. "What?" The Grand Master of Heaven found himself thoroughly confused, and the sudden sensation of the sky and earth moving made his head spin. In the next moment, he appeared in the separate Amber Province. This was where Othniel had exiled him. Zia had total control over the deleting space. He had more authority than the Chaos Ancient God here. Not only could he freely dispose of things within the space, he could also find the same time node. It wasn't that Zia didn't have the strength to battle the Grand Master of Heaven, but he shared the same thought as his master, the Primeval Lord of Heaven. When they had defeated the Interception sect, they had felt some modicum of guilt and did not want to fight him because of that. The moment the right space and time node had been found, Zia sent the Grand Master of Heaven out of the deleting space. Once Othniel had exiled the Grand Master of Heaven into the deleting space, he floated down. He worried that the Grand Master of Heaven would return quickly, so he planned to take Zen away as soon as possible. But before he could descend, a space fluctuation occurred not far away, and the Grand Master of Heaven emerged. Othniel's face contorted slightly before smoothing back out. Without hesitation, he slashed his hand through the air in the direction of the Grand Master of Heaven, and immediately wrapped him in another expanse of space. The Grand Master of Heaven found himself still in a daze after being forced out of the deleting space. It made no sense. How did Zia have such an ability? While he was stuck within his cloud of confusion, a space fluctuation enveloped him flawlessly and he found himself once more in the deleting space. Zia couldn't find the words to express his own confusion. Within a span of several seconds, the Grand Master of Heaven had been cast out only to be returned moments later. What was going on? With his intelligence, it was not difficult for Zia to grasp what was exactly going on. The only possible explanation could be that when the Grand Master of Heaven descended through the descending ring, he had fought with the Son of Truth who controlled that particular space. Zia could have never guessed that the reason the two fought was Zen. You'd best vent all that anger on the Son of Truth, Zia grumbled. With a wave of his hand, he sent the Grand Master of Heaven back out. Othniel though, who was in the separate Amber province, was on his guard. The moment he saw the Grand Master of Heaven was cast out, he began to delete the space. With no time to react, the Grand Master of Heaven was sent right back to the deleting space. He felt as if he were going to be sick. Zia sighed, his shoulders slumping. The Grand Master of Heaven might be difficult to deal with, and the Son of Truth probably had no choice but to continue to send him back, but it was not a good idea to keep throwing him back and forth like a ball. I suppose all I can do is close the deleting space. Over countless chaotic eras, Zia had managed the affairs and taken over the rights of the deleting space. He certainly had the ability to refuse the space that the Son of Truth had deleted to enter. However, Zia needed the substances that were sent in, one after the other, from the chaos. It allowed him to learn things from within the chaos. A soft whooshing sound startled Zia from his thoughts. The Grand Master of Heaven had regained his senses enough to utilize grand teleportation and reach Zia instantly. He raised his hand and swung his sword. The black radiance along the edges of his sword was as bright as fire, and came barreling towards Zia's face. Zia though was a little bit faster. Before the attack could plow into him, the Grand Master of Heaven disappeared. Zia turned quickly to look at the deleting pillars at the far end of the deleting space. He waved his hands before him, and a portion of the deleting pillars hummed to life with a bright light before quickly dimming. With that action, the rules of the deleting space had changed. There was a unique space node at the entrance of the deleting space, and it so happened to be controlled by Othniel. However, Zia had long ago changed it to be one way, so people could enter but not leave. But now that particular rule had changed. People could neither enter nor leave. When the Grand Master of Heaven had been sent out once more, Othniel immediately enveloped him with space and began to delete it. However, the space did not disappear, no matter how hard Othniel willed it to. The Grand Master of Heaven remained where he had appeared, and stared at Othniel with a puzzled expression. Could a Chaos Ancient God even make a mistake? What have you done? I can't sense the deleting space. Othniel cried in shock. Losing the ability to delete meant losing a trump card, but usually Chaos Ancient Gods had many of those up their sleeves. The fact that the ability he had obtained from the space of truth was weakened or muted by another made him feel on edge, the horrible feeling creeping up his spine. Chapter 3456, The Heart-Piercing Lock. The Grand Master of Heaven had already readied himself to enter the deleting space once more when Othniel said something strange to him. A visible frown appeared on his face as he stared back at Othniel. In the eyes of the Grand Master of Heaven, his opponents on both sides needed to be personally dealt with. As he was expelled in the deleting space that was controlled by Zia, he was surprised when he observed that the time node could be directly changed. When he was being transferred between the two places, all he thought about was how he could defeat Zia. In his mind, if he could replace Zia who was controlling the deleting space, then he could earn a lot from it. Most importantly, he could also return to the chaos through the time node. I didn't do anything. If you want, you can try again, the Grand Master of Heaven responded with a straight face. While Othniel heard these words, a strange expression glimmered in his eyes. He took a few steps forward and sneered, "Are you mocking me?" "No, of course not," the Grand Master of Heaven quickly replied. "I'm just hoping that you can try sending me back into that space again." Seeing the sincere expression of the Grand Master of Heaven, all of the Eternal Realm warriors that were currently present couldn't help but look at each other with confused faces. Right now, the Grand Master of Heaven had a rough estimate of Zia's abilities. It seemed that Othniel wasn't pretending. Zia had most probably shut down the deleting space. Now, the Grand Master of Heaven was more interested in this magical place and yearned for it even more. However, Othniel couldn't understand what the Grand Master of Heaven was really thinking. He tried several times, but the space around the Grand Master of Heaven was just constantly shaking and there was no way to send him in. With all that was happening, Othniel couldn't help but ask him, "Tell me. What exactly happened in that space?" The Grand Master of Heaven shrugged and said, I can't tell you that." Of course, he didn't have the slightest intention of telling Othniel the matter about Zia. "All right then, I'll know after I kill you." Othniel's voice suddenly became cold. He had a strong urge to figure out what had truly happened in the deleting space. Suddenly, the cubic space surrounding the Grand Master of Heaven transformed into a solid cube. Othniel controlled the space truth. With it, he could define and manipulate most of the spaces in the chaos. This time, he controlled the space containing the Grand Master of Heaven and transformed it into a solid state. Crash! With a wave of his hand, the whole cube instantly collapsed. If it was an ordinary Eternal Realm warrior, they would be completely shattered along with the crushed space fragments. However, the Grand Master of Heaven was fully prepared, and he was powerful enough not to be easily defeated by such kind of move. When the view became clear, all they saw were broken space fragments. The body of the Grand Master of Heaven couldn't be seen anywhere. Othniel instantly felt a shiver creeping beneath his skin, as if some dangerous beast was glaring at him somewhere in the dark. Suddenly, the Grand Master of Heaven appeared above his head. He was holding a long sword that was pointed downwards, like a praying swordsman. The tip of the sword immediately dashed downwards in an attempt to directly stab Othniel's head. At the same time, a blue light flashed in Othniel's eyes, and the space above his head suddenly became distorted. The long sword that was supposed to stab his head disappeared as it touched the distorted space. Immediately after that, the sword appeared from the side of the Grand Master of Heaven, directly aimed at his head. Othniel bent the space and threw the sword back to the Grand Master of Heaven to stab himself instead. However, just before the sword thrust through him, the eyes of the Grand Master of Heaven also beamed with the same blue light. Suddenly, the space beside his head also became distorted. The cyan misty sword that was fast approaching him instantly disappeared. In a split second, a distorted space appeared in front of Othniel's chest, and the sword rushed out with a violent force, thrusting directly towards his chest. Splat! A ray of cyan light pierced through Othniel from front to back. A hint of confusion appeared in Othniel's eyes as he slowly looked at the sword stabbing in his chest. Blood was dripping on his mouth as he stared back at the Grand Master of Heaven. Only I could distort the space. How did you? The truth was many people could actually connect 2 points in space and create a circular space channel. It was also the case with the space distortion that Othniel created. However, most temporary channels that were created by ordinary people were unstable. Only Othniel could manipulate and create a distorted space that could deflect a sword strike that had the power of hundreds of thousands of divine megatons. But it turned out that Othniel wasn't the only one who could do it now, as the Grand Master of Heaven blatantly used the same powerful skill to attack him. Since Othniel began to fight with this man, there had been several mysterious things he witnessed that he couldn't comprehend. You're asking me why I can do that? The Grand Master of Heaven spoke as he slowly pulled out his cyan misty sword from Othniel through the distorted spaces. It's because the truth level 30 is not unique to you. I can also grasp it. And you know what? I can grasp more skills from you if I want. Othniel's eyes narrowed. There was an extreme mixture of surprise and rage on his face. If their previous battles seemed to be opportunities to test each other's strengths, then now would be the time for a showdown. The Grand Master of Heaven's words rang in his ears, and he understood them very well. They meant that the Grand Master of Heaven could deprive the abilities of the Chaos Ancient God. Whether he could really do that or not was still unknown. However, the fact remained that he had just used the same space distortion 30 as Othniel did. You're an arrogant piece of garbage, aren't you? Let's see if you really have the ability to do that. Othniel roared in anger. His face began to deform, his pair of eyes started to merge into one, and his teeth became sharper. His head was beginning to expand rapidly as he attempted to return to his original form. The spectating warriors also knew that the two powerful masters would likely transform into their strongest forms if they were determined to have an all-out battle. That meant that Othniel would turn into his original monstrous form, and the Grand Master of Heaven would use his wild god body. However, much to their surprise, that wasn't the intention of the Grand Master of Heaven. He stood in the air and stared at Othniel with a mocking smile. Suddenly, Othniel's transformation stopped abruptly. It was as if a superior force suppressed the changes that were going on. Why would you need to transform? You look good in your human form. You don't need to become that ugly one-eyed monster. Then, the Grand Master of Heaven gently raised his cyan misty sword. Soon after, 3 thin threads quietly appeared and turned out to tightly wrap around Othniel's body. Suddenly, the white thin threads grew larger and turned into white jade chains. The other ends of the chains were connected to a small yellow lock that was in the hand of the Grand Master of Heaven. The lock was exceptionally exquisite, and there were undecipherable Sanskrit words on both sides. It was the heart-piercing lock, another powerful magic treasure of the Grand Master of Heaven. Previously, the Grand Master of Heaven had given a hint that 3 strikes were all it would take him to kill Othniel. These 3 sword strikes were what activated the heart-piercing lock that completely suppressed Othniel's body. Now everything in Othniel's body was locked up, meaning that all his thurgies were sealed. That was why there was no need for him to use the wild god power. On the outside, Othniel looked motionless. But the truth was he was currently in a fierce struggle within his body. He was trying to free himself, but the heart-piercing lock was absolutely powerful. He was extremely enraged with the fact that the dignified chaos ancient god like him would be defeated by the Grand Master of Heaven in this way. The Grand Master of Heaven knew about Othniel's ongoing efforts and struggling, but he didn't pay much attention to it. He just slowly descended while dragging the white jade chains. Now that he was able to successfully trap Othniel, it was time for him to deal with the other warriors present. He knew these warriors' high positions and standpoints in the source world, but it didn't matter to him. Since he couldn't kill the real masters in the 3 purities stage, he decided to annihilate first these duplicates of them. Chapter 3457, Backup Plan. After the Grand Master of Heaven descended, he couldn't help but gaze at those down below. The snake goddess, Fuxi, Yellow Thirk, each one of them made his blood boil. He knew that the people that stood before him had different standpoints and were mere avatars devoid of memory, but it didn't stop the inexplicable hatred that surged in his heart when his eyes swept over their faces. His negative feelings did not go unnoticed. Everyone felt the waves of anger that emanated from the Grand Master of Heaven, including Snake Goddess, Fuxi, Yellow Thirk and Divine Farmer who had gradually recovered from the form of a goat monster. Mahoney, however, felt a bit lucky. This mysterious man in black had such a furious expression when he looked at the others, but when it came to her, all he had was an expressionless gaze. She hoped she wouldn't find trouble with her. Just as Mahoney silently rejoiced, the Grand Master of Heaven turned towards her. "I shall kill this irrelevant person first." Buzz. The heart-piercing lock in his hand trembled just as a long, thin chain emerged and headed straight towards Mahoney. Instead of white jade, the chain was stark black, obviously of lower grade than the one that had trapped Othniel. But it was more than enough to trap Mahoney. After she heard the Grand Master of Heaven's words, Mahoney's face quickly paled. She rolled backwards, just as the chain headed her way, and tried to get out of her now precarious situation. The space in front of the black chain distorted as it appeared right in front of Mahoney. Puff. Mahoney's armor, a masterpiece that she was quite proud of, shattered underneath the piercing force of the black chain. With no defensive chestplate, the black chain sunk into her chest, and the moment it entered her body, the spearhead armor of destruction on her body collapsed instantly while her life force rapidly faded away. In the blink of an eye, Mahoney's life force dissipated entirely. An Eternal Realm warrior truly was no match against the Grand Master of Heaven. As the chain retracted, Mahoney's corpse snapped back and shot towards the black ship. "Deal with the corpse," the Grand Master of Heaven muttered darkly. The sight of Mahoney's corpse made Shira salivate. Her ghouls were weak and all she could really do was transform her own body. The Grand Master of Heaven basically awarded her an Eternal Realm warrior, which meant she had a lot of room to work with when it came to her transformation. In her eyes, Mahoney's body was an extremely rare treasure. Shira caught her body and gave Fuxi and the others a momentary side glance. "Thank you, Grand Master of Heaven." The meaning behind her eyes was clear. These Eternal Realm warriors were next. If Shira cultivated these warriors into ghouls, then she would be able to do anything she wanted in the source world. Yellow Thirch's and Divine Farmer's faces darkened when they witnessed Mahoney's end. Meanwhile, Fuxi and the Snake Goddess began to gather their power. Not long ago, these two groups of people were still fighting each other. Now there was no other choice out of this situation but to join hands and fight against this powerful enemy. This mysterious man in black was truly strange. Not only did he possess Othniel's truth level Thurgy, which was impossible to guard against, he also had the heart-piercing lock that had the ability to entrap and lock everything within its hold. The Snake Goddess exchanged a knowing look with Fuxi as she summoned a descending ring in her hand. After she obtained the golden red chaotic source spirits from Zen, she carefully studied the use of the descending rings. In the beginning, Fuxi was keen on reserving the descending rings to summon the augury dog. The augury dog was powerful, and was his best friend in the three purities stage. In terms of strength, he was only a little weaker than Fuxi, and much more powerful than the ordinary warriors at the Eternal Realm. A descending ring was not easy to obtain, so why would they use it just so that one more Eternal Realm master could guard the Pear Hill? The Snake Goddess did not want that. So on the three purities stage, she gave a descending ring to the primal crocodile race. They were also an extremely powerful force in the three purities stage but were extremely xenophobic and cared little for the affairs of the world. Even the element spirit race did not dare provoke them, much less enter their territory. A long time ago, the snake goddess saved the life of a little primal crocodile and earned her this elusive race's friendship. With this friendship forged, the leader of the race agreed to the snake goddess's request and promised to help her out whenever she needed their support to return the favor. There was no way she would summon such powerful warriors from the other shore if she had any other choice. This situation was so unexpected. Just a moment ago, everyone was watching the two fighting, and then suddenly Othniel was captured and all Eternal Realm warriors had to worry about their fates. Beside her, Fuxie's eyes remained full of fighting spirit. Save for the heart-piercing lock and a few small thurgies, this man in black wasn't that intimidating. Fuxie figured that if he truly went all out then he could defeat him. Just as the two were about to make their move, Yellow Thirch's forehead split open and a burst of hearty laughter was heard. Grand Master of Heaven, why are you in such a hurry to descend from the other shore? It was Claire from the element spirit race. There was no surprise on the Grand Master of Heaven's face when he heard this voice. He'd fought with the element spirit race for hundreds of chaotic eras, so it would be more surprising if they didn't show up. A smile broke through his face. As far as I know, you haven't found a way to descend yet. Claire scoffed. That's because they're too stupid. It doesn't matter if they are stupid or geniuses. If you don't have backup plans, just shut your mouth and admit that I've won. After he spoke, the Grand Master of Heaven lifted his cyan misty sword and stabbed towards Yellow Thirch's forehead. Yellow Thirch's expression changed and he revealed an incredibly charming smile. Although we missed the descending rings, it doesn't mean we don't have other ways to descend. He said in a girlish voice. Phew, everyone was witness to how Yellow Thirch's hair suddenly burned and the eyeball in the center of his forehead glowed with a golden light that emitted an aura similar to that of descending rings. They watched as his appearance, expression, and aura, all transformed into Claire's image. Before the Grand Master of Heaven could react, Claire had already stepped forward and swung Zen towards him, hard. Buzz! A burst of blue light flashed in the Grand Master of Heaven's eyes as he used the spatial distortion to dodge the blow. Dang it, Grand Master, that Zen can devour. The people from the black ship all tried to warn him, but it was already too late. The moment Zen touched the twisted space, he completely devoured the energy and returned the space to normal, which meant he smashed onto the Grand Master of Heaven with no hindrance whatsoever. Puff! Hit by such a formidable weapon, the Grand Master of Heaven was sent flying into the air. Claire smirked in satisfaction at this temporary weapon of hers. Fire! Sizzle! She wanted to ignite a flame but forgot the characteristics of Zen's body. The fire barely flickered as it was immediately absorbed by him. She made a face but did not really care. She took a step forward and reached the other side of the space. Again, she wielded Zen as a blunt weapon. Bang! As Zen's body smashed onto the Grand Master of Heaven the second time, Othniel, who was bound by the heart-piercing lock, was also dragged down and hit the ground hard. Chapter 3458, Swallow. The separate amber province looked like a rag. As the two fought, it began rolling, wrinkling, and tearing. Creatures that resided on the rag died miserably, they didn't even have any clue what had happened. All they felt was how heaven and earth collapsed. Even the few people who were aware of what happened weren't capable of resisting in a battle of this caliber. The boundary wall that could only be broken down by the Eternal Realm warriors' full strength grew weak under the impact. Splash! Once the south of the separate amber province sank, the ground was split into two, a crack that extended millions of miles revealed the scene in the chaos. The negative pressure produced as a result then attracted the chaotic clouds nearby, which then swarmed toward the crack. While the creatures of the separate amber province could only sit still and wait for death, the Oneness Sky Palace's members still held a glimmer of hope for life. The weakest disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace present were now at the other shore realm, free from the threat of chaotic energy. But during the battle between Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven, only a slight impact could cause them either death or injury. Everyone, run to the west. If you get lost, head for the Pear Hill. To the west, go through the boundary wall. The initially indestructible boundary wall was now riddled with holes, no longer able to stop everyone from escaping. Libby, Pierce, and the rest quickly organized the Oneness Sky Palace's disciples for smoother passage through it. In the meanwhile, the disciples of the Bearing race, the Divine Farmer race, and the New Moon race all returned to their respective flying ships. A battle of this level had already completely disrupted the initial plan, but so long as they made it to the Pear Hill, survival wasn't impossible. All the while, Claire was occupying the Yellow Thirch's body. The Divine Farmer had just been freed from a goat monster's state, and Mahoney had died. They had no time to worry about the lives of the Holy Soul Realm warriors. Splash! Another crack appeared on the ground as thousands of clods were thrown into the sky, each clod was as huge as over 100 mountains. In one of the clods, a two-winged earth dragon was curling up. Once it felt movement from outside, it quickly came out of the clod, only to find it was already high in the sky. Although it had reached the true God realm, it wasn't all that intelligent. While it was still thinking hard about what exactly was going on, a flame shot toward it. When the flame was still dozens of miles away, the heat it emitted had instantly burned the earth dragon through and through. The Grand Master of Heaven didn't want Othniel behind him to be any hindrance, so he simply stuffed him into another spatial treasure, the fishing drum. The two of them displayed incredible flexibility in a series of battles. While Claire had occupied the yellow Thyrch's body through the eyeball, her strength wasn't affected in the least. She held no disadvantage in the face of the Grand Master of Heaven. Grand Master of Heaven, this is the second time I've fought with you, isn't it? It doesn't seem like you've made any progress, Claire said with a mocking smile. The Grand Master of Heaven remained composed, but he was rather surprised. In terms of real strength, he was at the ice spirit's level. After fighting each other several times, this point was already proven. But while in the element spirit race, Claire was ranked third in terms of strength, a great gap remained between her and the ice spirit. At least, the Grand Master of Heaven wasn't taking her seriously back then. In just a few chaotic eras, she had managed to grow so strong, exceeding his imagination. Whoosh! While he was lost in thought, Claire used Zen to swing at him once again. It had to be noted, in this state, Zen was an absolutely perfect weapon. He had already managed to restrain several of the Grand Master of Heaven's trump cards. He was a highly specialized weapon that could absorb all sorts of energy. Most importantly, it was impossible to damage him. Thanks to Zen, the Grand Master of Heaven was stuck in a passive situation. After obtaining their freedom, Fuxi and the Snake Goddess flew to the southwest of the separate Amber province and stayed put. I thought I was the strongest in the chaos, but these two really are quite surprising, Fuxi said resentfully, watching both Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven up in the sky. They've lived through over 1,000 chaotic eras. Of course, you can't even think of comparing yourself with them, remarked the Snake Goddess calmly. The Nihility race, the Element Spirit race, and even the Snake Goddess were determined to get their hands on Zen. Now that their strength proved to be unequal to the task, they had to rely on a good strategy. And while the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire were distracted in battle, they had a chance. As for the black ship, the captain wasn't watching the battle unfold. If the Grand Master of Heaven was defeated, the black ship would be doomed. Therefore, the captain merely had to wait for the result. After all, he had something far more important to take care of. Buzz! Another two descending rings were activated. Then, two members of the Nihility race appeared before the captain. One turned out to be Samantha, the Grand Master of Heaven's disciple, and the other was the evil god. The latter glanced at the members of the black ship before snorting dismissively. To that, the brass man's face immediately darkened. Do you have something to say? The members of the black ship were not to be underestimated, after all. It was with the black ship's help that the evil god could grow so fast, get rid of Zen, and enter the other shore. But he'd become rather supercilious soon after getting strong. Just leave him alone, he was cocky enough when he was weak, Shira said, smiling at the evil god. The evil god smiled right back at her as though they were good friends that hadn't seen each other for a time. It was because of Shira that he could stay on the black ship. She had proven to be greatly patient. Where is the incarnation of the evil will? Samantha chimed in and broke the tension. Come with me, said the captain, nodding at Edith. Once Edith stretched out her hands, an invisible spaceship enveloped everyone. The next moment, it appeared in the west of the separate Amber province, where the Pear Hill and the Bering race had first fought. As the divine farmer chased the invisible ship, he consumed far too much of Usman's power, leaving the latter very weak. Fortunately, he was bound to the separate Amber province. So long as it wasn't completely destroyed, he wouldn't perish. Buzz! The invisible ship descended. All the members of the black ship, the evil god, and Samantha appeared before Usman. As the latter raised his hand, his gaze fell upon Shira and the evil god. From Shira, he could feel a specific kind of emotion that seemed to have something to do with him. Looking at the arrogant evil god, he saw a bit of himself. What do you want? With the group approaching aggressively, he knew something bad was about to happen. But he didn't seem to feel a sense of belonging to the Bering race. He was like a drop of oil floating in the water, impossible for him to join any kind of force. If he was forced to join the black ship, though, he wasn't going to refuse. This is the incarnation of the source world's evil will. You will swallow him, said Shira firmly, pointing at Usman. At that, Usman was instantly shocked. He raised his head to look Shira square in the eye. He wasn't afraid of anything, not even the warriors at the Eternal Realm, but now, a cold shiver just ran down his spine. Chapter 3459, Fusion. Just when Usman was about to struggle, Samantha, who was standing next to him, waved her horsetail whisk gently on his body. As the whisk touched Usman's face, he instantly felt his body become stiff all over. He was desperately trying to utter a word, but even his mouth was paralyzed, unable to say a word. How to devour him? Do I just eat him up directly? The evil god said as he looked at Usman with a wicked grin. Although the evil god would not devour the human flesh, he was pretty satisfied with Usman. The aura being emitted by Usman was almost exactly the same as his. That was why he thought that Usman was very suitable to be a part of him. Don't you have the ability to absorb one's soul? Samantha asked in confusion. That's right, you just need to devour his soul, Shira added. There was actually nothing wrong with devouring Usman's physical body, but the most important thing was to fuse with his soul by consuming it. With that, Samantha reached out her hand towards Usman's forehead, and a ray of cyan light was released from her palm. Unable to move an inch, Usman only felt a grueling gravitational force coming from Samantha's hand. His eyes rolled and his body trembled violently. Soon, his soul was gradually dragged out of his body. Generally, one's soul would look the same as their physical body, and there were only a very few exceptions. Usman's soul was one of them. His soul was very unique. It sort of looked like a cat with its fur standing on end and covered with soul thorns. As Samantha dragged it out, it started struggling insanely in her hand. However, if his physical body wasn't able to escape from Samantha, then his soul would be much more helpless. Whoosh! Samantha waved Usman's soul and quickly placed it on the evil god's head, for it to be absorbed into his mind. In just a matter of seconds, Usman's soul was successfully integrated into the evil god's mind. Unexpectedly, as soon as Usman's soul fused with the evil god, it struggled and even tried to take over. However, Samantha didn't have any intention of helping the evil god out. Instead, she asked him to deal with it by himself. Will he be okay? Shira asked curiously. Well, it depends on him. But he'd better sort it out quickly. Samantha shrugged her shoulders and didn't seem to care much about it. Upon seeing the indifferent expression on Samantha's face, Shira also backed off. In fact, even the entire Nihility race treated the evil god and Usman with the same attitude. As the incarnations of the evil wills, they weren't destined to be faithful partners for their race. Besides, the Nihility race just needed their identity, and it didn't matter to them whoever played the dominant role. However, for Shira, it was a bit complicated. Previously, she was infatuated with the original Usman, and the two of them shared some memories. So, she had quite a mixed feeling as the current Usman's soul was given to the evil god. We have already given so much to the evil god. If he can't even deal with the recently reborn Usman, then we might as well support Usman instead, Samantha added. Meanwhile, a sharp look of pain suddenly appeared on the evil god's face. The muscles on his face twisted constantly and gave off strange expressions. After a few seconds, his eyes closed and all his movements stopped. He seemed to have calmed down already. Then, after a short while, he finally opened his eyes. Something definitely changed as his eyes were as deep as the ancient wells. So, you won? Shira was the first to ask. Shira felt that the evil god didn't really change physically, but many incomprehensible expressions were contained in his eyes this time. Then, the evil god moved towards Shira. He looked at her with a peculiar expression in his eyes. I found some strange memories. What do you mean by strange memories? Shira asked. All of a sudden, the evil god reached out his hand, touched Shira's face, and drew her straight black hair towards him. As he smelled it, there was a visible frown on his face and he said, there's a strong stench of corpses. Why does that guy find it fragrant? Why do you have his previous memories? Shira stuttered as she quickly stepped back. Her pale face turned a little red. The other members of the black ship who were present eventually realized what was going on, but were also confused as to why it happened. Usman often did that to Shira in the past. He loved her scent even though it smelled like corpses. But it was obvious that the evil god didn't like that smell. When I merged with his soul, I also found some of the memory fragments. I guess the current Usman wasn't aware that these memory fragments existed within him, the evil god explained. With the appearance of the incarnation of the evil will, the memories of his previous life should have completely disappeared. Even in the source world, that was how they viewed reincarnation because the memory flame had completely vanished. However, it seemed that some memories from the previous life of Usman were somehow carried on. And now, even the current evil god had them. Well, it doesn't matter. What's important is how much impact you will have on the source world, Samantha butted in. To be able to control the source world was equivalent to controlling the core of the chaos. This was also how other Eternal Realm masters thought. But of course, it was no easy task to control the largest primitive land in the chaos. Moreover, there had never been an incarnation of the primitive land, so they thought that theoretically, it was impossible to gain control of it. However, many primitive lands had the incarnations of evil will. Take the one in Zen's body as an example. It was so small, but the evil god still appeared. The black ship and the Bering race intentionally cultivated the incarnations of the evil will for the same purpose. They wanted to control the source world through them. My impact on the source world, huh? The evil god's eyes narrowed as he looked at the boundary wall not far away. After he devoured Usman's soul, he instantly felt that the broken boundary wall was somehow related to him. Without wasting any time, the evil god stretched out his hands towards the boundary wall. Suddenly, the amber crystal clear boundary wall began to flow like melted honey. Under his control, the boundary wall that stretched for hundreds of miles quickly collapsed and flowed steadily. Seeing this, the other members of the black ship, including Shira and even Samantha, were greatly shocked. After the previous Usman's appearance, he was carefully cultivated by the black ship. At that time, Usman told them that he felt there were 5 stages that he could attain to improve himself. When he reached the 2nd stage, he was already able to merge with the boundary walls. It meant that he could open and close the boundary walls of the source world. He said that when he reached the 3rd stage, he would be able to control the boundary walls at will. When that happened, even powerful Eternal Realm warriors would have a hard time dealing with him. Unfortunately, as he was about to reach the 3rd stage, he had become the rebel and was killed. Eventually, the next Usman was cultivated by Yellow Thirk. But he was already devoured by the evil god while he was still at the early level of the 2nd stage. Logically speaking, even if the evil god had fused with Usman's soul, he would be able to reach the 2nd stage at most. However, what they were seeing now defied logic and exceeded their expectations. Whoosh, crash. At the same moment, a huge whistling sound came from the skies above. The Grand Master of Heaven suddenly appeared and was smashed down towards the boundary wall by Claire. When the evil god saw this, a pitch-black light flashed in his eyes and he stretched out his hand. In a matter of seconds, the boundary wall which was flowing like a fluid suddenly began to condense into a long spear. The boundary wall that was hundreds of miles wide was condensed into a 9-foot 9-inch long spear. He held it in his hand as it released a tremendous amount of power. As Claire viciously threw the Grand Master of Heaven down, her figure flashed and she kept chasing after him. At her top speed, her body could flicker and her figure couldn't be perceived by the naked eye. Even Samantha would find it difficult to capture her. However, now that the evil god had devoured Usman, he also gained the connection to the separate Amber Province. It meant that as long as any object was within the separate Amber Province, he could easily tell its location in an instant. With that, he raised the long spear with his right hand, and forcefully threw it in a certain direction. Chapter 3460, Taking Advantage of the Moment. It never occurred to Claire that someone would dare to attack her. In her eyes, no one matched her in strength, other than the Grand Master of Heaven and the Chaos Ancient Gods. She was moving to the left, as the Grand Master of Heaven fell towards that direction. However, as soon as she emerged from the space channel, a long spear shot towards her unexpectedly. Boom! The spear itself was extremely sturdy, and the power contained within it was immensely great. The impact from the spear sent Claire flying back into the space channel. Unfortunately, she slammed into it so hard that the space channel was smashed into pieces. As she flew backwards, the space around her cracked and shattered. As the evil god waved his hand, the spear moved according to his control, dancing in the air a few times. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Finally, he had adjusted the spear enough for it to point directly towards Claire. Without any hesitation, the evil god launched another spear attack on her. Claire had been caught off guard. When she finally came to her senses and saw the spear shooting towards her, her eyes flashed with rage. Whoosh! She violently swung Zen, using him to parry the incoming spear. To her surprise, the spear didn't shatter, but she did manage to deflect it. They stood no chance against her as long as she had her wits about her. However, just as Claire had deflected the spear, the Grand Master of Heaven appeared from behind. Buzz! A ray of cyan light shot out like a delicate thread. Then, a thin chain was made out under the light. It was the heart-piercing lock. If he managed to cast 3 chains, the battle would finally come to an end. However, Claire's speed and strength far exceeded the expectations of the Grand Master of Heaven. In their last battle, he was left at a complete disadvantage. While the Grand Master of Heaven tried to retreat quickly, the long spear suddenly flew to his aid. He stabbed Claire through the ribs with his sword. Just as he was about to use the first chain, Claire's body suddenly transformed. Fire spurted out from every orifice on her head. Her body erupted in flames, too. The flames soon enveloped Zen, rapidly moving him to the side. This was Claire's true form. The creatures of the element spirit race didn't have a clear concept of life. From the moment they were born, they continued to grow in strength, devouring weaker members in the process. No one knew just how many fire spirits of the element spirit race Claire had devoured in her lifetime. They only knew that she was a combination of all kinds of fire energy. She had sensed the strength of the Grand Master of Heaven's sword, so she quickly transformed into her real form to avoid the strike. However, it slipped her mind that she was carrying Zen, a human who could somehow absorb all kinds of energy. Splash! Any flame that touched Zen was quickly absorbed by him. Claire was frustrated as she realized what was happening. However, she figured that Zen had a limit to how much he could absorb, so she decided to stay in her true form. But the next moment, she felt the speed at which Zen was frantically absorbing her flames. She panicked. If she held on to Zen, it wouldn't be long before her whole body was absorbed by him. What is with this guy? She cried in her mind. After occupying the yellow Thircha's body, Claire had suppressed a portion of her energy. Even an Eternal Realm warrior would not be able to withstand the eruption of her energy. However, Zen was absorbing her flames as though they were harmless rays of sunshine. Unbelievable. At this point, Claire realized she had no other choice but to let go of Zen. But by the time she loosened her grip on him, he had managed to absorb more than a third of her body. As Zen plummeted towards the ground, in the eternal divine courtyard, more than 30 light pillars suddenly rose from the map surrounding the sacred cup. The energy of most flames was destructive, and the rising light pillars were mostly in the area symbolizing destruction. Only a very small number of light pillars were in the areas symbolizing creation and life. The 4 bronze statues were numb to the light pillars that came out from time to time. The man in the sacred cup was obviously different from any other creature in the past. But now, more than 30 light pillars suddenly appeared, which shocked them. Is this man a monster? Is he trying to perform some miracle? No one has ever reached this level before. While they were shocked, their expectations of Zen grew exponentially. Swoosh! After dodging the attack of the Grand Master of Heaven, Claire took shape again. In a flash, she reached out to grab Zen once more. Of course, the Grand Master of Heaven wasn't going to let this happen. As he waved the cyan misty sword, a ray of cyan light rushed towards her. Just as Claire was about to close the gap between her and Zen, the cyan light spilled into the gap, effectively blocking her way. Angry, Claire had no choice but to withdraw her hand. Quick-witted, she used spatial transference and reappeared on the other side of Zen. However, the Grand Master of Heaven saw this coming. Just as quickly, he shook the cyan misty sword again, launching a cyan light to block Claire's way. As the two fought, Zen continued to fall to the ground at a dangerous speed. Just as Zen was about to land, a figure poked his head out of a space fluctuation. A pair of hands suddenly emerged and plucked Zen out from the air, dragging him into the space channel. Once they saw what had happened, the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire were stunned for a moment. It's Fuxi. The Grand Master of Heaven's expression darkened. Because of Claire, he didn't have the time to finish off the two fakes. Even so, he never expected they would take action while he was preoccupied with battling Claire. How dare they? Just a moment earlier, the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire had been fighting fiercely. Now, they wordlessly decided to join forces to go after Fuxi. With Zen in his arms, Fuxi retreated back into the space channel and flew rapidly along it. With his speed, it was impossible for any ordinary Eternal Realm warrior to chase him. Perhaps only the Chaos Ancient Gods could do that. However, Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven were special. In a flash, the two of them also entered the space channel and caught up to Fuxi. Splash! Tiny fire snakes burst out from Claire's hands one after another. These fire snakes had a mind of their own and rushed towards Fuxi in the space channel. At the same time, the Grand Master of Heaven also summoned Cyan Sword Radiance directed at Fuxi. Sensing their thurgies quickly closing in on him, Fuxi turned around, with Zen in front of him. Click, click, Click. The extremely sharp sword radiance and the extremely fierce fire snakes all disappeared the instant they connected with Zen's body. Fuxi smiled. He could now use Zen as a really handy protective treasure. The Grand Master of Heaven and Claire didn't give up the chase. However, after a while, they realized they couldn't seem to catch up to Fuxi. In fact, it seemed as though he was getting farther and farther away. How is he so fast? It seems that something is pulling him. The Grand Master of Heaven and Claire were puzzled. They both knew that despite Fuxi's incredible strength, there was no way he could travel at that speed alone. They keenly sensed that something was yanking Fuxi forward. This was true. In the space channel, a thin energy beam was wrapped around Fuxi's waist. The red energy beam was actually the shadow of Snake Goddess. The shadow of Snake Goddess could extend indefinitely. Now, the Snake Goddess, who was over 100 miles away, was dragging Fuxi forward at high speed. In front of the Snake Goddess, there was a huge light sail. In order to reach this speed, the Snake Goddess was pouring most of her shadow into the light sail. The light sail then dragged her, Fuxi and Zen to quickly escape.